Oh, and I'm at that hour. That's convenient timing. So, hello to anyone who's here, other than NASCAR, of course. Which, well, I remember. Is that it? Hey, NASCAR, I'm doing pretty good, yeah. Doing pretty good all told. Still not 100%, but pushing through. So, let's do this while I remember. So that is check-in number 2 for you, NASCAR. Catch up with Abe in no time, I'm sure. Yeah. Oh, and a 3-stream streak. Good to have you back on the train then. Good to have you back. I genuinely appreciate it more than I can say. Now then, what are we doing today? So, that's done. Don't have any new followers or anything to thank, so that's not a thing to do. Oh, so actually what we do have today is, we got badges for America Day. I don't know who among my following is American, but the Twitch analytics tell me most of you is, so I think it'd be only fitting to do some badges for it. So, we've got, as always, we've got the obligatory sub badge, which I thought it'd be a bit fun to do. I'd create a tea in the arbor, so I've done that. If you feel like subscribing the day or renewing or skip, I don't exactly know how it works, but if you do some form of subscription, you get that. And of course, for anyone who just wants to sit and watch, we've got an hour watch badge for just some fireworks in red, white, and blue. Thought that'd be a bit of fun. So yeah, that's what's going on with the badges today. Now, yeah, thought it'd be good to do something. Gotta keep yourself busy. Good thing to do. Now. What's up next? Next. That's all the fixed stuff we've got to do. So we've got to wait until the appropriate time has come for people to stop by. So let's see. Last couple of things. I've really got to sort of establish a better sort of pattern for how I do the start of these, because I'm always coming in and like, oh yeah, what's going on? No idea. But to give people time to arrive, of course, doing a little bit of patter. So today, what are we doing today? So we've been talking about cursed objects. That's what we're on at the minute, right? So yeah, we did architecture of the library. We've done the make of the most of the beasts. Okay, well no worries if you can't stay at NASCAR. I do genuinely appreciate you showing up at all, and I do appreciate you staying alive if you do. But yeah, I've no expectation of anyone to stay here any full time anyway, but I always appreciate it. But yeah, so cursed objects, that right? So we spent some time talking about the different types of cursed objects, nature and magical objects, and so now I'm supposed to be doing a little expose on some of the specific ones that we've had, or that I've come across in the library. And it's sort of hard to narrow down the particulars, because obviously there's there's more in here than I know of. But let's see if we can pick out some fun ones. What's an interesting one? I guess I sort of don't know. I guess the question is what is interesting, right? Because like, I think to my, well, let's actually, I know my favourite one. Let's talk about one of my go-tos. So one of the wizards, not in like a locked room or anything, but just in his house, had a cursed mirror, which, if you look into it, will reflect you, and then your reflection will step out. And from what Lamp tells me, generally the idea is the reflection will try and kill you, because only one of you can remain, and then the other one has to go back into the mirror. Which I think is, you know, probably sort of shows a lot about the wizards, because I saw this mirror and looked into it, and the me that stepped out was just chill. Like, we chatted for a bit, he was very cool. I like that guy. And yeah, and then he just went back inside, which I do kind of regret, because I sort of feel like maybe it would have been better if I'd gone back inside, because it's not nice being in the library. And he seemed like, I mean, the mirror, I guess I don't know what the mirror's like. Maybe it's better that I did. But yeah, nice chap. And yeah, there's quite a few different cursed mirrors. I don't know why. Mirrors is sort of a sort of type of archetype that you get of these things. There's a few different ones like that. But Lamp says that the idea behind a magical mirror is that because a mirror seems to reflect another world, it's sort of symbolically like a line between realms. So that if you want to have like something to do with dimensions or other worlds or sort of stuff, a mirror is a good way to do that. And then there's other ones that are just, you know, that reflect things wrong in sort of an illusory sense. There's quite a lot of those actually. There's like, well, there's like a whole room of them on the like very, well, not like the first floor of the archive, but like first floor they actually have magical artifacts. There's like a whole, like pretty big warehouse. It's just various sorts of mirrors that make you look a bit fucked up. Like it's almost like you know you get those mirrors in circuses that make you look fucked up. It's almost like that, only they're subtler. So like, rather than making you like all weird and wiggly and like that, you just how'd you say? Well, they make little things different, like they change your eye colour slightly, or they make you look like you got spots where you don't or stuff. Like they're all labelled. Apparently, someone made like a big study of it. But apparently, yeah, there was like a whole thing where people would collect these mirrors, where they just like make people look uglier than they were, and yeah. Apparently, a lot of them is natural magical objects too, rather than being deliberately created. So, from what I can tell, is if an object is like, so I mentioned in there like what a magic item is, you have to have intent and mind that make a thing. But apparently, if you spend enough time obsession over a thing, you can sort of impart some of that naturally. And a lot of these is like that. It's like from people who have, you know, self-confidence issues or, you know, body dysmorphia or whatever, all just staring at them long enough that it just makes you look worse. Because they think they look worse. And yeah, there's this whole room of them. There's got to be hundreds and hundreds of them. Yeah. There's some more interesting ones too. What else? I mean, there's some that is just portals to other places. Some like, none of them seem to be able to go outside the library, but you can get ones that will just move you between different places in the library. I thought about keeping a couple of those around just for like quick travel, but Lamp says that because of the way the wards is unstable, there's a chance whenever you go through them they might just sort of cut off, and then you know slice in half part way. I just didn't really cast either. What else? There are a few different ones. There's one that like ages you more quickly, I think. Like you look into it and you go like time passes fast. I assume this is happening. Like to be clear, I haven't looked in that one. Like, but the place where it's like it's mounted on a wall, and across from it there's like a stone wall, and like there's an area where obviously it's reflected in the mirror, where the stone is like worn and cracked much more than the stone around it. I just assume that's what that one does. I haven't actually looked into it because obviously don't want to. Anything else? Let's go. I mean, what else? Oh, there are a couple that are in like sconces behind which got lanterns like that shoot fireballs, but I'm not sure that it's the mirrors that shoot those. That's I think the sconces more than anything. But yeah. Which I don't know if you're familiar with that sort of thing. Like there's an old-fashioned type of lantern that would be used that would have mirrors in the back to reflect more of the light outwards. Those are neat, and there's like an old hallway in the like a specific subsection that's lined with them, and they'll just shoot fireballs at you if you go past them. That's not fun. But yeah, It's more than that, but I can't think of any. I've really got to like make some time and make a list of like the really interesting ones, because I feel like I'm rapid firing these. But anyhow, I think that's enough. We're close to the hour and I've got to do my little spiel, so we'll go over now. So today we will be continuing on with Benito Cereno, which we started not yesterday, so it would have been Thursday, I think. Yeah. But, which I just struggled a bit that day, so I kind of called it early. But yeah, so from what we've read so far, there is a seal hunting ship that is docked on an island off of the coast of Chile, and an old Spanish galleon that's been refitted as a merchant ship has pulled in after a really hard voyage. Most of the Spanish crew is dead, as are about half of the 300 black people who were being carried as cargo. The captain, whose name is Benito Cereno, he's fainting and very ill and sort of of ill temperament, and apparently a friend of his died on the voyage, which he's sort of overcome, distraught by. And he's got a manservant who's been a black manservant who's been very close to him and has taken care of him. And the captain of our ship, or the seal hunting ship, he's over there currently rendering the maid and talking him out. That's about where we're at. Just for anyone who wasn't here last time. So, before I begin, as always, if at any point I stumble over something and you don't understand what I've said, or I go too fast and you miss something, or there's some technical interference, or for any other reason you miss something, let me know and I'm happy to go back over it. If you have questions, comments, feel free to let me know. I'll happy to hear those out, chat as we go. I'll probably take a few breaks as we're going. I don't think there's chapters in this one, but I will be stopping to take a drink. So if there's a burning question or something that you're worried it might interrupt, just drop it and I'll stop and give it a go during one of those breaks. Other than that, I don't think I've got much else to say. I'll have a quick swallow of water before we start, just to make sure I'm ready and good. There we are. But yeah, so without any further ado, so long as you're all sitting comfortably, I will begin. Though the remark, Captain Delano, a man of such a native simplicity as to be incapable of satire or irony, had been dropped in playful allusion to the Spaniard's singularly evidenced lordship over the black, yet the hypochondriac seemed some way to have taken it as a malicious reflection upon his confessed inability thus far to break down, at least on verbal summons, the entrenched will of the slave. Deploring this supposed misconception, yet despairing of correcting it, Captain Delano shifted the subject. Finding his companion more than ever withdrawn, as if still sourly digesting the less of the presumed affront above mentioned, by and by Captain Delano likewise become less talkative, oppressed against his own will by what seemed the secret vindictiveness of the morbidly sensitive Spaniard. But the good sailor himself, of a quite contrary disposition, refrained on his part alike from the appearance as from the feeling of resentment, and if silent, were only so from contagion. Presently the Spaniard, assisted by his servant, somewhat courteously crossed over from his guest, a procedure which, sensibly enough, might have been allowed to pass for either caprice of ill humour, had not master and man, lingering round the corner of the elevated skylight, begun whispering together in low voices. This were unpleasing, and more, the moody air of the Spaniard, which at times had not been without a sort of valetudinarian stateliness, now seemed anything but dignified, while the menial familiarity of the servant lost its original charm of simple-hearted attachment. In his embarrassment, the visitor turned his face to the other side of the ship. By so doing, his glance accidentally fell on a young Spanish sailor, a collar rope in his hand, just stepped from the deck to the first round of the mizzen rigging. Perhaps the man would not have been particularly noticed, were it not that, during his ascent to one of the yards, he, with a sort of covert intentness, kept his eye fixed on Captain Delano, from whom presently it passed, as if by natural sequence, to the two whisperers. His own attention thus redirected to that quarter, Captain Delano gave a slight start. From something in Don Benito's manner just then, it seemed as if the visitor had, at least partly, been the subject of the withdrawn consultation going on. A conjecture as little agreeable to the guest as it were little flattering to the host. The singular alternations of courtesy and ill-breeding in the Spanish captain were unaccountable, except on one or two suppositions: innocent lunacy or wicked imposture. But the first idea, though it might naturally have occurred to an indifferent observer, and, in some respects, had not hitherto been wholly a stranger to Captain Delano's mind, yet, now that in an incipient way he begun to regard the stranger's conduct something in the light of an intentional affront, of course the idea of lunacy were virtually vacated. But if not a lunatic, what then? Under the circumstances, would a gentleman, nay, any honest boor, act the part now acted by his host? The man were an impostor, some low-born adventurer masquerading as an oceanic grandee, yet so ignorant of the first requisites of a mere gentlemanhood as to be betrayed into the present remarkable indecorum. The strange ceremoniousness, too, at other times evinced, seemed not uncharacteristic of one playing a part above his real level. Benito Cereno, Don Benito Cereno, a sounding name. One, too, at that period, not unknown in the surname to supergoers and sea captains trading along the Spanish Main, as belonging to one of the most enterprising and extensive mercantile families in all the provinces, several members of it having titles, a sort of Castilian Rothschild, with noble brother or cousin in every great trading town in South America. The alleged Don Benito were an early manhood, about 29 or 30. To assume a sort of roving cadetship in the maritime affairs of such an house, what more likely a scheme for a young knave with talent and spirit? But the Spaniard were a pale invalid. Ne'er mind. For even to the degree of simulating mortal disease, the craft of some tricksters had been known to attain. To think that, under the aspect of infantile weakness, the most savage energies might be couched. These velvets of the Spaniard but the silky cord of his fangs. From no train of thought did these fancies come, not from within, but from without. Suddenly, too, and in one from, like all frost, it as soon vanished as the mild sun of Captain Delano's good nature regained its meridian. Glancing over once more towards his host, whose side face revealed above the skylight were now turned towards him, he was struck by the profile whose clearness of cut were refined by the thinness, incident to oil, as well as ennobled about the chin by the beard. Away with suspicion. He were a true offshoot of a true Hidalgo Serrano. Relieved by these and other better thoughts, the visitor, lightly humming a tune, now began indifferently pacing the poop, so as not to betray Don Benito that he had at all mistrusted incivility, much less duplicity. For such mistrust would yet be proved illusory, and by the event, though for the present the circumstances which had provoked that distrust remained unexplained. But when that little mystery should have been cleared up, Captain Delano thought he might extremely regret it did he allow Don Benito to become aware that he had indulged in ungenerous surmises. In short, for the Spaniard's black letter text, it were best, for a while, to leave open margin. Presently, his pale face twitching and overcast, the Spaniard, still supported by his attendant, moved over towards his guest, when, with even more than his usual embarrassment, and a strange sort of intriguing intonation, in a husky whisper, the following conversation begun. "Senor, may I ask how long you have lain at this isle?" "About a day or two, Don Benito." "And from what part are you last?" "Canton." "And there, senor, you exchanged your sealskins for teas and silks, I think you said." "Yes, silks mostly." "And the balance you took in specie, perhaps?" Captain Delano, fidgeting a little, answered, "Yeah, some silver, not a very great deal, though." "Ah, well, may I ask how many men you have, senor?" Captain Delano slightly started, but answered, "About 25, all told." "And at present, senor, all on board, I suppose?" "All on board, Don Benito," replied the captain, now with satisfaction. "And will be tonight, senor?" At this last question, following so many pertinacious ones, for the soul of him, Captain Delano could not but look very earnestly at the questioner who, Instead of meeting the glance, with every token of craven discomposure, dropped his eyes to the deck, presenting an unworthy contrast to his servant, who, just then, were kneeling at his feet, adjusting a loose shoe buckle. His disengaged face, meantime, with humble curiosity, turned openly up in his master's downcast one. The Spaniard, still with a guilty shuffle, repeated the question. And will we tonight, senor? Yeah, for all I know, returned Captain Delano. But nay, rallying himself in the fearless trip. Some of them talked of going off on another fishing party about midnight. Your ships generally go more or less armed, I believe, senor. 6 pounds or 2, in case of emergency, with intrepidly indifferent reply, with a small stock of muskets, sealing spears, and cutlasses, you know. As he thus responded, Captain Delano again glanced at Don Benito, but the latter's eyes were averted. On abruptly and awkwardly shifting the subject, he made some peevish allusion to the calm, and then, without apology, once more with the attendant withdrew the opposite bulwarks, where the whispering were resumed. At this moment, and ere Captain Delano could cast a cool thought upon what had just passed, the young Spanish sailor, before mentioned, was seen descending from the rigging. In an act of stooping over to spring him board to the deck, his voluminous, unconfined frock or shirt, coarse woolen, much spotted with tar, opened out far down the chest, revealing the soiled undergarment of what seemed the finest linen, edged about the neck with a narrow blue ribbon, sadly faded and worn. At this moment, the young sailor's eyes were again fixed on the whisperers, and Captain Delano thought he observed a lurking significance in it, as if silent signs of some Freemason sort had the instant been interchanged. This once more impelled his own glance in the direction of Don Benito, and, as before, he could not but infer that he himself formed the subject of the conference. He paused. The sound of the hatchet polishing fell on his ears. He cast another swift side look at the two. They had the air of conspirators. In connection with the late questionings and the incident of the young sailor, these things now begat such a return of involuntary suspicion that the singular guilelessness of the American could not endure it. Plucking up a gay and humorous expression, he crossed over to the two rapidly, saying, Don Benito, your black here seems high in your trust. A sort of privy councillor, in fact. Upon this, the servant looked up with a good-natured grin, but the master started as from a venomous bite. There were a moment or two before the Spaniard sufficiently recovered himself to reply, which he did at last with cold constraint. Yes, senor, I have trust in Babo. Here Babo, changing his previous grin and mere animal humour into an intelligent smile, not ungratefully eyed his master. Finding that the Spaniard now stood silent and reserved, as if involuntarily, or purposely, given in that his guest's proximity were inconvenient, just then Captain Delano, unwilling to appear uncivil even to incivility itself, made some trivial remark and moved off again, and again turning over in his mind the mysterious demeanour of Don Benito Cereno. He had descended from the poop, and, wrapped in thought, were passing near a dark hatchway leading down to the steerage, when perceiving motion there, he looked to see what moved. The same instant there was a sparkle in the shallow hatchway, and he saw one of the Spanish sailors prowling there, hurriedly placing his hand in the bosom of his frock, as if hiding something. Before the man could have been certain who it were that were passing, he slunk below out of sight. But enough was seen of him to make sure that he were the same young sailor before noticed in the rigging. What were that which so sparkled? Thought Captain Delano. It were no lamp, no match, no live coal. Could it have been a jewel? But how come sailors with jewels? Or with silk-trimmed undershirts either? Has he been robbing the trunks of the dead cabin passengers? If so, he would hardly wear one of the stolen articles on board ship here. If now that were indeed a secret sign I saw passing between the suspicious fellow and his captain a while since. If I could only be certain that, in my uneasiness, my sense did not deceive me then. Here, passing from one suspicious thing to another, his mind resolved the strange questions put to him concerning his ship. By a curious coincidence, as each point were recalled, the black wizards of Ashante would strike up with their hatchets, as in continuous comment on the white stranger's thoughts. Pressed by such enigma's importance, it would have been almost against nature had it not even into the least distrustful eye some ugly misgivings obtruded. Observing the ship, now helplessly fallen into a current, with enchanted sails, drifting with increased rapidity seaward, and noting that from a lightly interrupted projection of the land, the seal ridden, the stout mariner began to quake, as thoughts which he barely durst confess to himself. Above all, he began to feel a ghostly dread of Don Benito, and yet, when he roused himself, dilated his chest, felt himself strong in his legs, and coolly considered it, what did all these phantoms amount to? Had the Spaniard any sinister scheme, it must reference not so much to him, Captain Delano, as to his ship, the Bachelor's Delight. Hence, the present drifting away of the one ship from the other, instead of favouring any such possible scheme, were, for the time at least, opposed to it. Clearly, any suspicion, combined in such contradictions, must need be delusive. Besides, were it not absurd to think of a vessel in distress, a vessel by sickness almost dismanned of her crew, a vessel whose inmates were parched for water? Were it not 1,000 times absurd that such a craft should at present be of a piratical character, where a commander, either for himself or those under him, cherished any desire but for a speedy relief and refreshment? But there might not general distress, first in particular, be affected? And might not that same undiminished Spanish crew, alleged to have perished off to a remnant, be at that very moment lurking in the hold? On heartbroken pretence of entreating a cup of cold water, fiends in human form had got into lonely dwellings, nor retired until a dark deed had been done. And among the Malay pirates, it were no unusual thing to lure ships after them into their treacherous harbours, or entice boarders from a declared enemy at sea by the spectacle of thinly manned or vacant decks, beneath which prowled 100 spears with yellow arms, ready to upthrust them through the mats. Not that Captain Delano had entirely credited such things. He had heard of them, and now as stories they recurred. The present destination of the ship was the anchorage. There she would be near his own vessel. Upon gaining that vicinity, she might not think the San Dominic. No, upon entering that vicinity, might not the San Dominic, like a slumbering volcano, suddenly let loose energies now in. He recalled the Spaniard's manner while telling this story. There were a gloomy hesitancy and subterfuge about him, with just the manner of one making up his tale for evil purposes, as he goes. If that story were not true, what were the truth? That the ship had unlawfully come into the Spaniard's possession? In many of its details, especially in reference to the more calamitous parts, such as the fatalities among the seamen, a consequent prolonged beating about, a past suffering from obstinate calms, and still continued suffering from thirst. In all these points, as well as others, Don Benito's story had been corroborated by not only the wailing ejaculations of the indiscriminate multitude, white and black, but likewise, which seemed impossible to be counterfeit, by the very expression and play of every human feature which Captain Delano saw. If Don Benito's story were throughout an invention, then every soul on board, down to the youngest negroes, were his carefully drilled recruit of the plot. An incredible inference. And yet if there were grounds for mistrusting his veracity, that inference were a legitimate one. I'll pause here for a moment and have a quick drink of water. Those questions of the Spaniard, there indeed one might pause. Did they not seem put with much the same object with which the burglar or assassin by time reconnoitres the walls of an house? But with ill purpose to solicit such information openly of the chief person in danger, and so in effect setting him on his guard, how unlikely a procedure were that? Absurd then to suppose that these questions had been prompted by evil designs. As the same conduct which, in this instance, had raised the alarm, served to dispel it. In short, there was scarce any suspicion or uneasiness, however apparently reasonable at the time, which were not now, with equally apparent reason, dismissed. At last he began to laugh at his former forebodings, and laugh at the strange stick, for, in its aspect, some way sided with them, as it were, and laughed too at the odd-looking blacks, particularly those old scissor grinders, the Ashantis, and those bedridden old knitting women, the oakum pickers, and almost at the dark Spaniard himself, the central hobgoblin of all. For the rest, ever in serious way seemed enigmatical, and now good-naturedly explained away by the thought that, for the most part, the poor invalid scarcely knew what he were about, either sulking in black vapours or putting idle questions without sense of object. Evidently, for the present, the man were not fit to be entrusted with the ship. On some benevolent plea withdrawing the command from him, Captain Delano would yet have to send her to Concepcion, in charge of his second mate, a worthy person and good navigator. A plan not more than convenient for the San Dominick and for Don Benito, for, relieved from all anxiety, keeping wholly to his cabin, a sick man, under the good nursing of a servant, would probably by the end of the passage be in a measure restored to health, and with that he should also be restored to authority. Such was the American's thoughts. It was tranquilizing. There are a difference between the idea of Don Benito's darkly preordaining There were a difference between the idea of Don Benito's darkly preordaining Captain Delano's fate and Captain Delano's lightly arranging Don Benito's. Nevertheless, it were not without something of relief that the good seaman presently perceived his whaleboat in the distance. Its absence had been prolonged by unexpected detention at the sealer's side, as well as its returning trip lengthened by the continual recession of the goal. Ivanch and Speck were observed by the blacks. Their shouts attracted the attention of Don Benito, who, with a return of courtesy, approaching Captain Delano, expressed satisfaction at the coming of some supplies, slight and temporary, as they must necessarily prove. Captain Delano responded, but while doing so his attention was drawn to something passing on the deck below. Among the crowd climbing the landward bulwark, anxiously watching the coming boat, two blacks, to all appearances accidentally incommoded by one of the sailors, violently pushed him aside, which the sailor some way resenting, they dashed him to the deck, despite the earnest cries of the oakum pickers. "Don Benito," said Captain Delano quickly, "do you see what's going on there? Look." But seized by his cough, the Spaniard staggered, with both hands to his face, on the point of falling. Captain Delano would have supported him, but the servant was more alert. With one hand sustaining his master, with the other applied the cordial. Don Benito restored, the black withdrew his support, slipping aside a little, but dutifully remaining within call of a whisper. Such discretion were here evinced as quite wiped away, in the visitor's eyes, any blemish of impropriety which might have attached the attendant from the indecorous conferences we have before mentioned. Showing too that if the servant were to blame, it might be more the master's fault than his own, since when left to himself he could conduct thus well. His glance called away from the spectacle of disorder, with a more pleasing one before him. Captain Delano could not avoid again congratulating his host upon possessing such a servant who, though perhaps a little too forward now and then, must upon the whole be invaluable to one in the invalid's situation. "Tell me, Don Benito," he added with a smile, "I should like to have your man here for myself. What will you take for him? Would 50 doubloons be any object?" "Master wouldn't part with Babel for 1,000 doubloons," murmured the black, overhearing the offer and taking it in earnest, and, with the strange vanity of a faithful slave, appreciated by his master, scorning to hear so paltry a valuation put upon him by a stranger. Don Benito, apparently hardly yet completely restored, and again interrupted by his cough, made but some broken reply. Soon his physical distress became so great, reflected his mind too apparently, that as if to screen the sad spectacle, the servant gently conducted to his master below. Left to himself, the American, to while away the time till his boat should arrive, would have pleasantly accosted one of the few Spanish seamen he saw, but, recalling something that Don Benito had said, touching their ill conduct, he refrained as a shipmaster indisposed to countenance cowardice or unfaithfulness in seamen. While with these thoughts, standing with eye directed forward towards the handful of sailors, suddenly he thought that one or two of them returned his glance with a sort of meaning. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. They again seemed to see the same thing. Under a new form, but more obscure than any previous one, the old suspicion recurred, but in the absence of Don Benito, were less apanic than before. Despite the bad account given to the sailors, Captain Delano resolved forthwith to accost one of them. Descending the poop, he made his way through the blacks, his movement drawing a queer cry from the oaken pickers, prompted by whom the negroes, twitching each other aside, divided before him. As if curious to see what the object of this deliberate visit to their ghetto, closing in behind tolerable order, followed the white stranger up. His progress thus proclaimed as by mounted kings at arms, and escorted as if by a Kaffir guard of honour, Captain Delano, assuming a good-humoured, off-handed air, continued to advance, now and then saying a blithe word to the negroes, and his eye curiously surveying the white faces, here and there sparsely mixed in with blacks, like a stray white ball venturously involved in the ranks of the chessmen opposed. I'll pause again and have a quick drink of water. My mouth is very dry tonight. While thinking which of them to select for his purpose, he chanced to observe a sailor seated on the deck, engaged in tying the strap of a large block. A circle of blacks squatted round him, inquisitively eyeing the process. The mean employment of the man were in contrast with something superior in his figure. His hand, black with continually thrusting it into the tarpaul, held for him by a negro, seemed not naturally allied to his face, a face which would have been a very fine one but for its haggardness. Whether this haggardness had aught to do with criminality could not be determined, since, as intense heat and cold, though unlike, produce sensations, so innocence and guilt, when through casual association with mental pain, stamping any visible impress, use one seal, a hacked one. Not again that this reflection occurred to Captain Delano at the time, charitable man as he were, rather another idea. Because observing so singular an haggardness, combined with a dark eye averred as in trouble and shame, and then again recalling Benito's confessed ill opinion of his crew, insensibly he were operated upon by certain general notions which, while disconnecting pain and abashment from virtue, invariably linked them with vice. If indeed there be any wickedness on board the ship, thought Captain Delano, be sure that man there has fouled his hand in it, even as now he fouls it in the pitch. I don't like to accost him. I'll speak to this old Jack here on the windlass. He advanced to an old Barcelona tar, in ragged red breeches, dirty nightcap, cheeks drenched and bronzed, whiskers dense as their thorn edges. Seated between two sleepy-looking Africans, this mariner, like his younger shipmate, were employed upon some rigging, splicing a cable. The sleepy-looking blacks performing the inferior function of holding the outer parts of the rope for him. Upon Captain Delano's approach, the man at once hung his head below its previous level, the one necessary for business. It appeared as if he desired to be thought absorbed, with more than common fidelity in his task. Being addressed, he glanced up, but with what seemed a furtive, diffident air, which had strangely enough on his weather-beaten visage, much as if a grizzly bear, instead of growling and biting, should simper and cast sheep's eyes. He asked several questions concerning the voyage, questions purposefully referring to several particulars in Don Benito's narrative, not previously corroborated by those impulsive cries written the visitor on first coming aboard. The questions was briefly answered, confirming all that remained to be confirmed with the story. The negroes about the windlass joined in with the old sailor, but, as they become talkative, he by degrees become mute, and at length quite glum, seemed morosely unwilling to answer more questions. Yet, all the while, this ursine air was somehow mixed with his sheepish one. Despairing of getting into an embarrassed talk with such a centaur, Captain Delano, after glancing round for a more promising countenance, seeing none, spoke pleasantly to the blacks to make way for him, and so amid various grins and grimaces returned to the poop, feeling a little strange at first, he could hardly tell why, but upon the whole would regain confidence in Benito Cereno. How plainly, thought he, did that old whiskerando yonder betray a consciousness of ill desert. No doubt, when he saw me coming, he dreaded lest I, praised by his captain of the crew's general misbehaviour, come with sharp words for him, and so down with his head. And yet now I think of it, that very fellow, if I err not, one of those who seemed so earnestly eyeing me here a while since. The current spin one's head around almost as much as they do the ship. Here now is a pleasant sort of sunny side, quite sociable too. His attention had been drawn back to a slumbering negress, partly disclothed through the lacework of some rigging, lying, with youthful limbs carelessly disposed, under the lee of the bulwarks, like a doe in the shade of a woodland rock. Sprawling at her lapped breast was her wide-awake form, stark naked, its black little body half lifted from the deck, crosswise with its dams, its hands like two paws clambering upon her, its mouth and nose ineffectually rooting to get to the mark, and meantime giving vexatious half-grunts, blending with the composed snores of the negress. The uncommon vigour of the child at length roused the mother. She started up at a distance, facing Captain Delano, but as if not at all concerned with the attitude in which she had been caught, delightedly she caught the child up, with maternal transports covering it with kisses. There's naked nature now, pure tenderness and love, thought Captain Delano, well pleased. This incident prompted him to remark the other negresses more particularly than before. He was gratified with their manners. Like most uncivilized women, they seemed at once tender of heart and tough of constitution, equally ready to die for their infants or fight for them. Unsophisticated as leopardesses, loving as doves. Thought Captain Delano. These perhaps are some of the very women who Ledyard saw in Africa and gave such a noble account of. These natural sights somehow insensibly deepened his confidence at ease. At last he looked to see how his boat were getting on, but it was still pretty remote. He turned to see if Don Benito had returned, but he had not. To change the scene, as well as to please himself with a leisurely observation of the coming boat, stepping over into the mizzen chains, he clambered his way into the starboard quarter gallery, one of the abandoned Venetian-looking water balconies previously mentioned. Retreats cut off from the deck. As his foot pressed the half-damp, half-dry sea moss, matting the place, and a chance phantom's cat's paw, an islet of breeze, unheralded, unfollowed, as this ghostly cat's paw came fanning his cheeks. As his glance fell upon the row of small round deadlights, all closed like coppered eyes in a coffin, and the state cabin door once connecting with the gallery, even as the deadlights had once looked out upon it, but now corked fast like a sarcophagus lid, with purple-black tarred-over panel, threshold and post. And it bethought him of the time when this state cabin and this state balcony had heard the voices of the Spanish king's officers, and the forms of the Lima Viceroy's daughters, perhaps. Hey, well, good to have you. No worries about looking. Always happy to have someone by. I just noticed. It's done. And he bethought him of the time when the state cabin and this state balcony had heard the voices of the Spanish king's officers, and the forms of the Lima Viceroy's daughters had perhaps leaned where he stood, and the forms of the Lima Viceroy's daughters had perhaps leaned where he stood, as these and other images flitted through his mind, as the cat's paw through the cabin, through the calm. Gradually he felt rising a dreamy inquiry, like that of one who, alone on the prairie, feels unrest from the repose of the noon. He leaned against the carved balustrades, again looking off towards his boat, but found his eye fallen upon the ribbon grass trailing along the ship's waterline, straight as a border of green box, and parterres of seaweed, broad ovals and crescents, floating nigh and far, with what seemed long formal alleys between, crossing the terraces of swells and sweeping round, as if leading to the grottos below. And overhanging all with a balustrade by his arm, which, partly stained with pitch and partly embossed with moss, seemed the child ruin of some summer house, grand garden, long running a waste. Trying to break one charm, he would but be charmed anew. Though upon the wide sea, he seemed in some far inland country, prisoner in some deserted chateau, left to stare at empty ground and peer out at vague roads, when their wagon or wayfarer passed. These enchantments were a little enchanted as his eyes fell on the corroded main chains, of an ancient style, massy and rusty in link, shackle and bolt. They seemed even more fit for the ship's present business than the one for which she had been built. Presently, he thought, something moved nigh the change. He rubbed his eyes and looked hard. Groves of rigging were about the chains, and there, peering from behind the great stay, like an Indian from behind an hemlock, a Spanish sailor, a marlinspike in his hand, was seen. He made what seemed an imperfect gesture towards the balcony, but immediately, as if alarmed by some advancing step along the deck within, vanished into the recesses of the hempen forest like a poacher. What meant this? Something the man had sought to communicate, unbeknownst to anyone, even his captain. Did the secret involve aught unfavourable to his captain? Those previous misgivings of Captain Delano was about to be verified. Or in his haunted mood at the moment, some random unintentional motion of the man, while busy with the stay as if repairing it, and mistaken for a significant beckoning. Pause here again and have a swallow of water. Not unbewildered, again he gazed off for his boat, but it was temporarily hidden by a rocky spur of the arm. As with some eagerness he bent forward, watching for the first shooting view of its beak. The balustrade gave way before him like charcoal. Had he not clutched an outreaching rope, he would have fallen into the sea. The crash, though feeble, and the fall, though hollow, of the rotten fragments must have been overheard. He glanced up. With sober curiosity, peering down upon him, one of the old oakum pickers slipped from his perch to an outside boom. While below, the old negro, and invisible to him, reconnoitring from a porthole like a fox from the mouth of its den, cracks a Spaniard sailor again. From something suddenly suggested by the man's air, the mad idea now doubted into Captain Delano's mind that Don Benito's plea of indisposition in withdrawing below were but a pretense. They were engaged there, maturing his plot, which the sailor, by some means, gaining an inkling, had a mind to warn the stranger against. Incited, it may be, by gratitude for a kind word and forced boarding the ship. But from foreseeing some possible interference, like this that Don Benito had, beforehand, given such a bad character to his sailors, or praising the negroes, though indeed the former seemed as docile as the latter contrary. The whites, too, by nature, were the shrewder race. A man with some evil design would he not be likely to speak well of that stupidity, which would blind the depravity and malign the intelligence from which it might not be hidden? Not unlikely, perhaps. But if the whites had dark secrets concerning Don Benito, could then Don Benito be in any way in complicity with the blacks? They were too stupid. Besides, who ever heard of a white so far a renegade as to apostatize from his very species almost by leaning in against it with negroes? These difficulties were former ones. Lost in their mazes, Captain Delano, who had now regained the deck, were uneasily advancing along it, when he observed a new face, an aged sailor seated cross-legged near the main hatchway. His skin was shrunk up with wrinkles, like a pelican's empty pouch, his hair frosted, his countenance grave and composed. His hands were full of ropes, which he was working into a large knot. Some blacks was about him, obligingly dipping the strands for him here and there, as the exigencies of the operation demanded. Captain Delano crossed over to him and stood in silence, surveying the knot. His mind, by a not uncongenial transition, passing from its own entanglements to those of the enemy. For intricacy, such a knot he had never seen in an American ship, nor indeed in any other. The old man looked like an Egyptian priest, making Gordian knots for the temple of Ammon. The kind seemed a combination of double bowline knot, treble crown knot, backhanded well knot, not in and out knot, and jamming knot. At last, puzzled to comprehend the meaning of such a knot, Captain Delano addressed the knotter. "What are you knotting there, my man?" "The knot," with a brief reply, without looking up. "So it seems. What's it for?" "For someone else to undo," muttered back the old man, playing his fingers harder than ever, the knot being now nearly completed. While Captain Delano stood watching him, suddenly the old man threw the knot towards him, saying in broken English, first heard in the ship, something to this effect: "Undo it, cut it quick." He said low, but with such condensation of rapidity, the long, slow words in Spanish, which had preceded and followed, almost operated as covers to the brief English between. For a moment, not in hand and not in end, Captain Delano stood mute, while, without further heeding him, the old man was now intent upon other ropes. Presently there was a slight stir behind Captain Delano. Turning, he saw the chained negro, a Tufel, standing quietly there. Next moment the old sailor rose, mutter in hand, followed by a subordinate negroes, removed to the forward part of the ship, where in the crowd he disappeared. An elderly negro, clout like in an infant's, with a pepper and salt head and a kind of attorney air, now approached Captain Delano. In tolerable Spanish, with a good-natured, knowing wink, he informed him that the old knotter was simple-witted, but harmless, often playing his odd tricks. The negro concluded by begging the knot, for of course the stranger would not care to be troubled with him. Unconsciously it were handed to him. With a sort of congé, the negro received it and, turning his back, ferreted into it like a detective, custom house officer after a smuggled laces. Soon, with some African word equivalent to a shower, he tossed the knot overboard. All this is very queer now, thought Captain Delano, with a qualmish sort of emotion. As one feeling incipient seasickness, he strove, by ignoring symptoms, to get rid of the malady. Once more he looked off for his bow. To his delight, they were now again in view, leaving the rocky spur astern. A sensation he experienced, after at first relieving his uneasiness with unforeseen efficacy, soon began to remove it. The less distant sight of that well-known bow, showing it, not as before, half blended in with the haze, with outline defined, so that its individuality, like a man's, were manifest. That bow, Rover by name, bow which, though now in strange seas, had often pressed the beaches of Captain Delano's own, and, brought to its threshold for repairs, had familiarly lain there as a Newfoundland dog. The sight of that household boat evoked 1,000 trustful associations, which, contrasted with previous suspicions, filled him not only with lightsome confidence, but somehow with half-humorous self-reproach at his former lack of it. What a Massa Delano, Jack of the Beach, they called me when I landed. I am Massa. That same that, duck satchel in hand, used to paddle along the water, aside with a schoolhouse made from the old hulk. Little Jack of the Beach, that used to go burying with cousin Nat and the rest. To be murdered here at the ends of the earth, on board a haunted pirate ship by an horrible Spaniard? Too nonsensical to think of. Who would murder a Massa Delano? His conscience is clean. There is someone above. Far, far, Jack of the Beach. You're a child indeed, a child of the second childhood, old boy. You're beginning to dote and drool, I'm afraid. Light of heart and foot, he stepped aft, and there were met by Don Benito's servant, who, with a pleasing expression, responsive to his own present feelings, informed him that his master had recovered from the effects of his coughing fit, and had just ordered him to go present his compliments to his good guest, Don Amasa, and said that he, Don Benito, would soon have the happiness to rejoin him. There now, do you mark that again? Thought Captain Delano, walking the poop. What donkey I was. This kind of gentleman who here sends me his compliments. He, but 10 minutes ago, dark lantern in hand, was dodging round some old grindstone in the old, sharpening an hatchet for me. I thought, well, his long calms have a morbid effect on my mind. I've often heard, though I never believed it before. Glanced toward the bow. There's Rover, good dog. A white bone in her mouth. Pretty big bone though, seems to me. What? Yeah, she's fallen afoul of the bubbling tide rip there. Sets her the other way too, for the time. Patience. About noon, though, from the greyness of everything, it seemed to be getting towards dusk. The calm were confirmed. In the far distance, away from the influence of land, the leaden ocean seemed laid out and leaded up. Its course finished soul gone, defunct. The current from landward, where the ship were, increased silently, sweeping her further and further towards the trance waters beyond. Still, from his knowledge of these latitudes, cherishing hopes for a breeze, a fair and fresh one, at any moment, Captain Delano, despite present prospects, buoyantly counted upon bringing the San Dominic safely to anchor ere night. A distance swept over were nothing, since, with a good wind, 10 minutes sailing would retrade more than 60 minutes drifting. Meantime, one moment turning the Mark Rover, fighting the tide rip, and the next to Don Benito, approaching, he continued walking the poop. Gradually he felt a vexation arising from the delays of his host, of his boat, They soon merge into uneasiness, and at last, his heart falling continually as from a stage box to the pit, upon the strange crowd before and below him, and by, recognising there the face, now composed to indifference, of the Spanish sailor, that seemed to beckon from the main chains, something with his old trepidation returned. Ah, thought he gravely enough, this is like the org, because it went off, it follows not that it won't come back. Though ashamed of the relapse, he could not altogether subdue it, and so, exerting his good nature to the utmost, and sensibly he come to a compromise. This strange craft, strange history too, and strange folks on board, but nothing more. By way of keeping his mind out of mischief till the boat should arrive, he tried to occupy it with turning over and over, in a purely speculative sort of way, some lesser peculiarities of the captain and crew. Among others, 4 curious points recurred. First, the affair of the Spanish lad assailed with a knife by the slave boy, an act winked at by Don Benito. Second, the tyranny in Don Benito's treatment of Artufo, the black, as if a child should lead a bull of the Nile by the ring in his nose. Third, the trampling of the sailor by the 2 negroes, a piece of incident passed over without so much as a reprimand. Fourth, the cringing submission of their master of all the ship's underlings, mostly blacks, and if by the least inadvertence they feared to draw his despotic pleasure, or displeasure. Coupling these points, they seem somewhat contradictory.
Ah, the rat!
Hey Abbe, good to have you. You're just in time for us to be about to enter into an outbreak. But I'll just quickly, I'll quickly re-summarise what we've covered since starting. So, no much more was made about the man who's in chains. He's yet to apologise. It occurred to the captain in the American ship that he didn't think Don Benito, the captain of the Spanish one, were acting like a gentleman, and he sort of began to suspect he might actually be an up-jumped like crewman after the captain died, who might be planning to pirate him, especially because he asked after the number of crew he had and the weapons on board, as well as their goods and treasure. And he's sort of been going back and forth and sort of been subtly signalled by a couple of the Spanish crewmen as he contemplates whether or not he is about to be murdered and robbed. But he mostly thinks he's not. And that's the outbreak. So, I'll have a quick swallow of water while that runs. Oh, I'm very dry indeed today. But yeah, 2 minutes of ad space to fill. What shall we say? I'm sort of struggling with this one, which I think is it's not a first for me of Melville, but it sort of comes and goes, and this is one of the worst ones for it, unfortunately. Which isn't to say it's one of the worst stories of Melville's that I've read. I quite rate it, really. In terms of content, I'd probably place it second only to Bartleby the Scrivener, although I must admit it feels like it's dragging over the same points pretty heavily, but I think that's sort of the point. It's meant to be, he's stuck on this ship that's semi-becalmed, and it's meant to feel like it's dragging, but it doesn't make for a very gripping sort of story. The problem is that Melville tends to use a lot of big words and a lot of run-on sentences, and so it becomes a very difficult thing to read, which, I mean, it does sort of take you out of it a bit. It makes it hard. And if I was doing better, if this was another day, I'd probably be getting through it all right, but it's not and I'm not, so it's sort of just a struggle. But yeah. Still, I think we're doing all right. Let's see. Yeah, there's only about 40 pages left of it, so we're more than halfway through. No, we're not even halfway through. We're about halfway through. We're almost halfway through anyway. I reckon probably it's 2 more hours of reading to get through it, maybe a little bit more, which I must admit I'm not looking forward to, but I've said I'll get through it and I mean to do it, even though I don't want to. Because like I say, sometimes it's important to do things that's hard, even if you don't want to do them. And at least with this one done, we'll be done with Melville for a little while. I must admit, I think I'm starting to find a dislike of Melville. It's not to say that I think he's a bad writer. I think he's quite a good one, but the way he writes, I don't enjoy. I think it's the same as with Mansfield, really, although it's for different reasons. I just find him a bit of a slog, which is a shame, because there's definitely something to him, but I'm just not getting a lot out of it compared to what I'm putting in. So yeah, still, sooner done, sooner we can move on. Anyway, as it's over, I'll have another quick swallow of water. And we'll press on. I mean to finish this tonight, I really do. So, coupling these points, they seem somewhat contradictory. But what then, thought Captain Delano, glancing towards his now nearing boat. What then? Why, Don Benito is a very capricious commander, but he's not the first of the sort I see. That's true, he rather exceeds any other. As a nation, continued in his reveries, these Spaniards are all an odd set. The very word Spaniard has a curious conspirator, Garfork's twang to it. And yet, I dare say, Spaniards in the main are as good folks as any Duxbury, Massachusetts. Ah, good, the last rover has come. As, with its welcome freight, the boat touched the Southern, the oaken pickers, with venerable gestures, sought to restrain the blacks who, with the sight of 3 gurried water casks in its bottom and a pile of wilted pumpkins in its bow, hung over the bulwarks in disorderly rapture. Don Benito, with his servant, now appeared, his current perhaps hastened by hearing the noise. Of him, Captain Delano sought permission to serve out the water, so that all might share alike, and none injure themselves by unfair excess. But sensible and, on Don Benito's account, kind as this offer were, it was received with what seemed impatience, as if aware that he lacked energy to go. As a commander, Don Benito, with the true jealousy of weakness, resented as an affront any interference. So at least Captain Delano inferred. In another moment the cask was being hoisted in, where some of the eager negroes accidentally jostled Captain Delano, where he stood by the gangway, so that unmindful of Don Benito, yielding to the impulse of the moment, with good-natured authority he bade the blacks stand back to enforce his words, making use of an half-mirthful, half-menacing gesture. Instantly the blacks paused, just where there was, each negro and negress suspended in his or her posture, exactly as the word had found them, for a few seconds continuing so, while, as between the responsive posts of a telegraph, an unknown syllable ran from man to man among the perched oaken pickers. While the visitor's attention was fixed by this scene, suddenly the hatchet polishers half rose, and a rapid cry came from Don Benito. Thinking that at the signal of the Spaniard he were about to be massacred, Captain Delano would have sprung for his bow, but paused as the oaken pickers, dropping down into the crowd with earnest exclamations, forced every white and every negro back at the same moment with gestures friendly and familiar, almost jocose, bidding in substance not to be a fool. Simultaneously the hatchet polishers resumed their seats, quietly, as so many tailors, and at once, as if nothing had happened, the work hoisting in the cask was resumed, whites and blacks singing and attacking. Captain Delano glanced towards Don Benito. As he saw his meagre form in the act of recovering itself to reclining in the servant's arms, into which the agitated invalid had fallen, he could not but marvel at the panic by which he himself had been surprised, on the dark supposition that such a commander who, upon legitimate occasion, was so trivial too, as it now appeared, could lose all self-command, were, with energetic iniquity, going to bring about his murder. The cask being on deck, Captain Delano were handed a number of jars and cups by one of the steward's aides, who, in the name of his captain, entreated him to do as he had proposed, dole out the water. He complied with Republican impartiality as to the Republican element, which almost seeks one level, serving the oldest white no better than the youngest black, excepting indeed poor Don Benito, whose condition, if not rank, demanded an extra allowance. To him, in the first place, Captain Delano presented a fair picture of the fluid, but, thirsting as he were for it, the Spaniard quaffed not a drop until after several grave bows and salutes. A reciprocation of courtesies which the sight-loving Africans hailed with a clapping of hands. 2 of the less wilted pumpkins being reserved for the cabin table, the residue were minced up on the spot for the general regalement. With the soft bread, sugar, and bottled cider, Captain Delano would have given the whites alone, and in chief Don Benito, but the latter objected, with disinterestedness, not a little pleased the American, which disinterested not a little pleased the American, I should say. And so mouthfuls all around was given a lot of whites and blacks, except in 1 bottle of cider, which Babbo insisted upon setting aside for his master. Here it might be observed that, as on the first visit to the boat, the American had not yet permitted his men to board the ship, neither did he now, being unwilling to add to the confusion of the deck. Not uninfluenced by the peculiar good humour at present prevailing, and through the time oblivious of any but benevolent faults, Captain Delano, who, from recent indications, counted upon a breeze with an hour or 2 at the furthest, dispatched the boat back to the sealer, with orders for all the hands that could be spared immediately to set about rafting casks to the watering place and filling them. Likewise, he bade word be carried to his chief officer that if, against present expectation, the ship were not brought to anchor by sunset, and he'd be under no concern, for there were to be a full moon that night. He, Captain Delano, would remain on board, ready to play the pilot, come the wind soon or late. As the 2 captains stood together, observing the departing boat, the servant, as it happened, having just spied the spot on his master's velvet sleeve and being silently engaged at rubbing it out, the American expressed his regret that the Sam Dominique had no boats, none at least but the unseaworthy old bulk of the longboat, which walked as a camel skeleton in the desert, and almost as cumbrous, almost as bleach, lay pot-wise inverted amidship, one side a little tipped, furnishing a subterraneous sort of den for a family group of the blacks, mostly women and small children who, squatting on old mats below or perched above in the dark dome on the elevated seats, was descried some distance within like a social circle of bats, sheltering in some friendly cave at intervals, ebb and flights of naked boys and girls, 3 or 4 years old, darting in and out of the den's mouth. "Had you 3 or 4 boats now, Don Benito?" said Captain Delano. "I think that by tugging the oars, your negroes here might help along matters some. Did you sail from port without boats, Don Benito?" "They were stove in by the gales, senor." "Not bad. Many men too, you lost them. Boats and men, those must have been hard gales, Don Benito." "That's told speech," grinned the Spaniard. "Tell me, Don Benito," continued his companion with increased interest, "tell me, were these gales immediately off the pitch at Cape Horn?" "Cape Horn? Who spoke of Cape Horn?" "Yourself did, when giving me an account of your voyage," answered Captain Delano, with almost equal astonishment at the eating of his own words, even as he ever seemed eaten into his own heart, on part of the Spaniard. "You yourself, Don Benito, spoke of Cape Horn," emphatically repeated. The Spaniard turned in a sort of stooping posture, pausing an instant, as one about to make a plunging exchange of elements as from air to water. At this moment a messenger boy, a white, hurried by, in the regular performance of his function, carrying the last expired half-hour forward, a forecastle from the tavern timepiece, to have it struck at the ship's large bell. "Master," said the servant, discontinuing his work on the coat sleeve and addressing the rapt Spaniard with a sort of timid apprehensiveness, as one charged with duty, the discharge of which, it were foreseen, would prove irksome to the very person who imposed it, and for whose benefit it were intended. "Master told me never mind where he was, or how engaged, always to remind him to a minute when shaving time comes. Miguel has gone to strike the half-hour afternoon. It is now, master. Will master go into the cuddy?" "Ah, he is," answered the Spaniard, starting us from dreams into realities, and turned upon Captain Delano, who said that ere long he would resume the conversation. "Then if master means to talk more to Don Amasa," said the servant, "why not let Don Amasa sit by master in the cuddy? Master can talk, and Don Amasa can listen, while Balbo here lathers and straps." "Yes," said Captain Delano, not unpleased with the social plan. "Yes, Don Benito, unless you'd rather not, I will go with you." "So be it, senor." As the 3 passed off, the American could not but think at another strange instance of his host's capriciousness, this being shaved with such uncommon punctuality in the middle of the day. But he deemed it more than likely the servant's anxious fidelity had something to do with the matter, inasmuch as a timely interruption served to rally his master from the mood which had evidently been coming upon him. The place called the cuddy were a light deck cabin formed by the poop, a sort of attic to the large cabin below. Part of it had formerly been the quarters of the officers, but since their death all partitionings had been thrown down, and the whole interior converted into one spacious and airy marine hall. For absence of fine furniture and picturesque displays of odd appurtenances, somewhat answering to the wire-clad hall of some eccentric bachelor squire in the country who hangs his shooting jacket and tobacco pouch on deer antlers, and keeps his fishing rod, tongs and walking stick in the same corner. The similitude were heightened, if not originally suggested, by glimpses of the surrounding sea, since in one aspect the country and ocean seemed cousins German. The floor of the cuddy were matted. Overhead, 4 or 5 old muskets were struck in horizontal holes from the beams. One side were a claw-footed old table lashed to the deck, a thumb missile on it, and over it a small meagre crucifix attached to the bulkhead. Under the table lay a dented cutlass or two, with an act harpoon among some melancholy old rigging, like an heap of poor friars' girdles. There was also 2 long, sharp, ribbed settees of Malacca cane, black with age and uncomfortable to look at as inquisitors' rats, with a large misshapen armchair which, furnished with a rude barber's crotch at the back, working with a screw, seeming some grotesque engine of torment. A flag locker in one corner, open, exposing various coloured bundles, some rolled up, others half unrolled, others still tumbled. Opposite were a cumbrous washstand of black mahogany, all of one block, with a pedestal like a font, and over it a railed shelf containing combs, brushes and other implements of the toilet. A torn hammock of stained grass swung near, the sheets tossed and the pillow wrinkled up like a brow, as if whoever slept here slept but illy, with alternate visitations to sad thoughts and bad dreams. The further extremity of the cuddy, overhanging the ship's stern, were pierced with 3 openings, windows or portholes according as men or cannon might peer, socially or unsociably out of them. At present neither men nor cannon were seen, though huge ring bolts and other rusty iron fixtures of the woodwork hinted at 24-pounders. Glancing towards the hammock as he entered, Captain Delano said, "You sleep here, Don Benito?" "Yes, senor, since we got into the mild weather." "It seems a sort of dormitory sitting room, sail loft, chapel, armoury and private closet altogether, Don Benito," added Captain Delano, looking round. "Yes, senor. The events have not been favourable to much order in my arrangements." Here the servant, napkin on arm, made a motion as if waiting his master's good pleasure. Don Benito signified his readiness, whereupon, setting him in the Malacca armchair, and for the guest's convenience drawn opposite one of the settees, the servant commenced operations by throwing back his master's collar and loosening his cravat. There is something in the negro which, in a particular way, fits him for avocations about one's person. Most negroes are natural valets and hairdressers, taking the comb and brush congenially as to the castanets, and flourishing them apparently with almost equal satisfaction. There is too a smooth tract about them in their employment, with marvellous noiseless gliding briskness, not ungraceful in its way, singularly pleasing to behold, and still more so to be the manipulated subject of. And above all, it is the greatest gift of good humour, not the mere grin or laugh is here meant. Those are unsuitable, but a certain easy cheerfulness, harmonious in every glance and gesture, as though God had set the old negro to some pleasant tune. Just going to pause here for a moment to say this is a very uncomfortable sort of book, or story I should say. Like, obviously it's of the time, but I don't know. Melville, I know Melville's reputation as being an anti-racist author. Like, he was in favour of equality among races, but like the attitudes of which he has grown up, the way he speaks about people, is still very singularly uncomfortable. At least in my personal, point of view. I just have to have a drink here since I'm pausing. Now again, this is one of those texts which I'm sure at the time was very forward-thinking in its ideas about the rights and qualities of people of colour, but just, you know, it really comes across as what's the term? Not disingenuous, patronising more than anything. I'm quite uncomfortable to read. Yeah. Moving on. When to this is added the docility arising from the unaspiring contentment of a limited mind, and that susceptibility of blind attachment sometimes inherent in hearing in indisputable inferiors, one readily receives why those hypochondriacs Johnson and Byron, it may be something like hypochondriacs the hypochondriac Benito Cereno, took to their hearts almost to the exclusion of the entire white race, their servant men and the Negroes, Barber and Fletcher. If that be in the Negro which exempts him from the inflicted sourness of the morbid or cynical mind, how, in his most prepossessing aspects, must he appear to a benevolent one? When at ease with respect to exterior things, Captain Delano's nature were not only benign, but familiarly and humorously so. At home he had often taken rare satisfaction in sitting his door, watching some free man of colour at his work or play. If in a voyage he chanced to have a black sailor, invariably he were on chatted and half gamesome terms with him. In fact, like most men of good blithe art, Captain Delano took the Negroes, not philanthropically, but genially, just as other men to Newfoundland dogs. Okay, so everything I just said about it coming across as patronising, patronising is not a strong enough term there. I can't think of a strong enough word. That was... Well. This is a historical book written about the turn of the 9th or the 18th century. So this, I mean, it's a time when slavery is still very much in effect, and it's still maddeningly uncomfortable to read. I do not like it. And worse, it's an art book to read, so it's uncomfortable in many multiple different ways still. One cannot ignore history, one cannot look away from it. This is what the world was like 200 years ago. I thank God every day we're not there still. Hitherto, the circumstances in which he found the Saint Dominique had repressed the tendency. In the cuddy, relieved from his former uneasiness, and for various reasons more sociably inclined than at any previous period of the day, and seeing the coloured servant, napkin on arm, so debonair about his master, in a business so familiar as that of shaving, too, all his old weakness for Negroes returned. Among other things, they were amused with an odd instance of the African love of the bright colours and fine shows, and the blacks informally taking from the flag locker a great piece of bunting of all hues, and lasciviously tucking it under his master's chin for an apron. The mode of shaving among the Spaniards is a little different from what it is with other nations. They have a basin specifically called a barber's basin, which on one side is scooped down, so as accurately to receive the chin, against which it is closely held and lavering, which is done not with a brush, but with soap dipped in the water of the basin and rubbed on the face. In the present instance, salt water was used for lack of better, and the parts lathered was only the upper lip and low down under the throat, all the rest being cultivated beard. The preliminaries being somewhat novel to Captain Delano, he sat curiously eyeing them, so that no conversation took place, nor for the present did Don Benito appear disposed to renew any. Setting down his basin, the Negro searched among the razors, as for the sharpest, and having found it, gave it an additional edge by expertly stropping it on the firm, smooth, oily skin of his open palm. He then made a gesture as if to begin, but midway stood suspended for an instant, one hand elevating the razor, the other professionally dabbling among the bubbling suds on the Spaniard's lank neck. Not unaffected by the close sight of the gleaming steel, Don Benito nervously shuddered, his usual ghastliness heightened by the lather, which lather again were intensified in its hue, with the contrasting sootiness of the Negro's body. Altogether the scene was somewhat peculiar, at least to Captain Delano, nor as he saw the two thus postured could he resist the vagary that in the black he saw an headsman, and in the white man at the block. This was one of those antic conceits, appearing and vanishing in a breath, from which, perhaps, the best regulated mind is not always free. Meantime, the agitation of the Spaniard had a little loosened the bunting from around him, so that one broad fold swept curtain-like over the chair arm of the floor, revealing amid a profusion of armorial bars and ground colours, black, blue and yellow, a closed castle and blood-red field diagonal with a lion rampant in a white. The castle and the lion, the castle and the lion, exclaimed Captain Delano. Why, Don Benito, this is the blackguard splain you use here. As well as only I am not the king that sees this, he added with a smile, but turned towards the black. It's all one, I suppose, so the colours be gay. Which paper remark did not fail somewhat to tickle the negro. Now, master, he said, readjusting the flag, and pressing the head gently further back into the couch of the chair. Now, master, and the steel glanced nigh the throat. Again, Don Benito faintly shuddered. You must not shake so, master. See, Dona Massa, master always shakes when I shave him. Yet master knows I'd never have drawn blood. It's true if master would shake so. I miss some of these times. Now, master, he continued. And now, Dona Massa, please go on with your talk about the girl and all that. Master can hear, and between times master can answer. Ah, yes, the girl, said Captain Delano. The more I think of your voyage, Don Benito, the more I wonder, not of the gales, terrible as they must have been, but the disastrous interval following them. For here, by your account, you have been these 2 months and more getting from Cape Horn to Santa Maria, a distance which I myself, with a good wind, have sailed in a few days. True, you had calms and long ones, but to be becalmed for 2 months, that is at least unusual. Oh, Don Benito, had almost any other gentleman told me such a story, I should have been half disposed to a little incredulity. Here an involuntary expression come over the Spaniard, similar to that just before on the deck, and whether it were the start he gave, or a sudden gawky roll of the yawl in the calm, or a momentary unsteadiness of the servant's hand, however it was, just then the razor drew blood, spots of which stained the creamy lather under the throat. Immediately the black barber drew back his steel and remained in his professional attitude, backed to Captain Delano and faced John Benito. He held up the trickling razor, saying with a sort of half-humorous sorrow, "See, master, you shook so, it's Babel's first blood." No sword drawn before James I of England, no assassination in that timid king's presence could have produced a more terrified aspect than one now presented by Don Benito. Poor fellow, thought Captain Delano, so nervous he can't even bear the sight of a barber's blood. This unstrung, sick man, is it credible that I should have imagined he meant to spill all my blood, who can't endure the sight of one little drop of his own? Surely, Amasa Delano, you have been beside yourself this day. Tell it not when you get home, sappy Amasa. Well, he looks like a murderer, doesn't he? More like as he himself would have been done for. Well, this day's experience should be a good lesson. Meantime, while these things was running through the honest seaman's mind, the servant had taken the napkin from his arm and, to Don Benito, he said, "But answer Don Master, please, master, while I wipe this ugly stuff off the days and stop at the inn." As he said the words, his face was turned half round, so as to be alike visible to the Spaniard and the American, and seen by his expression when he were desirous, by getting his master to go on with the conversation, considerably to withdraw his attention from the recent annoying accident. As if glad to answer the offered relief, Don Benito resumed, rehearsing the Captain Delano that not only were the calms of unusual duration, but the ship had fallen in with obstinate currents and other things, he added, some of which were but repetitions of former statements, to explain how it come to pass that the passage from Cape Horn to Santa Maria had been so exceedingly long. Now and then mingling with his words incidental praises, less qualified than before, of the blacks for their general good conduct. These particulars were not given consecutively, the servant, at convenient times, using his razor, and so between the intervals of shaving, the story and panegyric went on with more than usual huskiness. Captain Delano's imagination, now again not wholly at rest, there was something so hollow in the Spaniard's manner, with apparently some reciprocal hollowness to the servant's dusky comment of silence, that the ideal flashed across him that possibly master and man, for some unknown purpose, was acting out, both in word and deed, nay, to the very tremor of Don Benito's limbs, some juggling play before him. Neither the suspicion of collusion lacked apparent support from the fact of those whispered conferences before mentioned. But then what could be the object of enacting this play, and the barber before him? Last, regarding the notion as whimsy, insensibly suggested perhaps by the theatrical aspect of Don Benito and his eloquent ensign, Captain Delano speedily banished it. The shaven over, the servant bestirred himself with a small bottle of scented waters, pouring a few drops on the head, and then diligently rubbing the vehemence of the exercise, causing the muscles of his face to twitch rather strangely. His next operation was with comb, scissors, and brush, going round and round, smoothing a curl here, clipping an unruly whisker hair there, giving a graceful sweep to the temple lock with other impromptu touches, evincing the hand of a master. While, like any resigned gentleman in a barber's hand, Don Benito bore all much less uneasily, at least, than he had done the razoring. Indeed, he sat so pale and rigid now that the negro seemed a Nubian sculptor finishing off a white statuette. All being over at last, the standard of Spain removed, tumbled up and tossed back into the floured locker, the negro's warm breath blowing away any stray air which might have lodged down his master's neck, collar and cravat readjusted, a speck of lint whisked off the velvet lapel, all this being done, backing off a little space and pausing with an expression of subdued self-complacency, the servant for a moment surveyed his master, as in toilet at least the creature of his own tasteful hands. Captain Delano playfully complimented him upon his achievement, at the same time congratulating Don Benito. But neither sweet waters, nor shampooing, nor fidelity, nor sociality delighted the Spaniard. Seeing him relapsing into forbidden gloom and still remaining seated, Captain Delano, thinking that his presence were undesired just then, withdrew, on pretence of seeing whether, as he had prophesied, any signs of a breeze was visible. Walking forward to the mainmast, he stood a while, thinking over the scene, not without some undefined misgivings, when he heard a noise near the cuddy, and turning saw the negro, his hand to his cheek. Advancing, Captain Delano perceived that the cheek was bleeding. About to ask the cause when the negro's wailing soliloquy enlightened him. When will master get better from his sickness? Only the sad heart of the sickness beings made him so been babble so. Cut him babble with the razor, because only by accident the babble had given master one little scratch. For the first time in so many a day too. Holding his hand to his face. Is it possible for Captain Delano? Was it the wreaking private his Spanish spy against this poor friend of his? That Don Benito had his sullen manner, impelled by his sullen manner, impelled me to withdraw. This slavery breeds ugly passions in a man. Poor fellow. You're about to speak in sympathy to the negro, but with a timid resistance he now re-entered the cuddy. Presently master and man come forth, Don Benito leaning on his servant as if nothing had happened. But a sort of love quarrel after all, thought Captain Delano. He accosted Don Benito, and they slowly walked together. They had gone but a few paces when the steward, a tall, rara-looking mulatto, orientally set off with a pagoda turban formed by 3 or 4 Madras handkerchiefs wound about his head, tier on tier, approaching with a salam, announced lunch in the cabin. On their way thither, the 2 captains was preceded by the mulatto, who, turning round as he advanced, with continuous smiles and bows, ushered them on. A display of elegance which quite completed the insignificance of the small, bare-headed Bappa, who, as if not unaccustomed of inferiority, eyed askance the graceful steward. But in part, Captain Delano imputed his jealous watchfulness to that particular feeling which the full-blooded African entertains for the adulterated one. As for the steward, his manner, if not to speak in much dignity or self-respect, yet evidenced his extreme desire to please, which is doubly meritorious, as at once Christian and Chesterfieldian. Captain Delano observed with interest that while the complexion of the mulatto were hybrid, his physiognomy were European, classically so. Don Benito, whispered he, I am glad to see this usher of the golden rod of yours. The sight refutes an ugly remark once made to me by a Barbados planter. When a mulatto has a regular European face, look out for him, he is a devil. But see, your steward here has features more regular than King George of England's, and yet there he nods and bows and smiles. A king indeed. A king of kind hearts and polite fellows. What a pleasant voice he has too. Yes, Signora. But tell me, has he not, so far as you have known him, always proved a good worthy fellow? Said Captain Delano. Pausing while a final genuflection with a final genuflection, the steward disappeared into the cabin. Come, for the reason just mentioned, I am curious to know. Francisco is a good man, a sort of sluggishly responded Don Benito. Like a phlegmatic appreciator who would neither find fault nor flatter. I thought so. It was strange indeed, and not very creditable to us whiteskins if a little of our blood mixed with the Africans should far from improving the latter's quality. Had the sad effect of pouring vitriolic acid into black broth, improving the hue perhaps, but not the wholesomeness. I don't like reading this book. I just don't. Right, pressing on. Doubtless, senor, but glancing at Baba, not to speak of Negroes, your plantas de marca have held applied to the Spanish and Indian intermixture in our provinces. I know nothing about the matter, he listlessly added. Near they enter the cabin. The lunch were a frugal one. Some of Captain Delano's fresh fish and pumpkin, biscuits and salt beef, the reserved bottle of cider, the San Dominique's last bottle of Canary. As they entered, Francisco, with 2 or 3 colourful eggs, were over and over the table, giving the last adjustments. Upon perceiving their master, they withdrew, Francisco making a smiling congé, and the Spaniard, without condescending to notice it, fastidiously remarking to his companion that he relished not superfluous attendance. Without companions, host and guest sat down, like a childless married couple, at opposite ends of the table, Don Benito waving Captain Delano to his place and, weak as he were, insisting upon that gentleman being seated before himself. The Negro placed a rug under Don Benito's feet and a cushion behind his back, and then stood behind not his master's chair, but Captain Delano's. At first this a little surprised the latter, but it was soon evident that, in taking his position, the lad was still true to his master, since by facing him he could the more readily anticipate his slightest want. This is an uncommonly intelligent fellow of yours, Don Benito, whispered Captain Delano across the table. You say true, senor. During the repast, the guest again reverted a part of Don Benito's story, bringing further particulars here and there. He inquired how it were that the scurvy and fever should have committed such wholesale havoc upon the whites while destroying less than half the blacks. As if this question reproduced the old scene of plague before the Spaniard's eyes, miserably reminding him of his solitude and cabin, where before he had so many friends and officers round it. His hands shook, his face became hueless, broken words escaped, but directly the same memory of the past seemed replaced by insane terrors of the present. With staring eyes he stared before him at vacancy, for nothing would be seen but the hand of his servant, pushing the Canary towards him. At length a few sips served partially to restore him. Made random reference to the difficult constitution of races, enabling one to offer more resistance to certain maladies than another. The thought were new to his companion. Presently Captain Delano, intending to say something to his host concerning the pecuniary part of the business he had undertaken for him especially, since he was strictly accountable to his owners, with reference to the new suit of sails and all other things of that sort, and naturally preferring to conduct such affairs in private, were desirous that the servant should withdraw, imagining that Don Benito for a few minutes could dispense with his attendance. He, however, waited a while, thinking that as the conversation proceeded, Don Benito, without being prompted, would perceive the propriety of the step. But it were otherwise. At last catching his host's eye, Captain Delano, with a slight backwards gesture of his thumb, whispered, Don Benito, pardon me, but there is an interference with the full expression of what I have to say to you. Upon this the Spaniard changed countenance, which were imputed to his resenting him, as if in some way a reflection upon his servant. After a moment's pause, he assured his guest that the blacks remaining with him could be of no disservice, because since losing his officers he had made Baba, whose original officer now appeared, had been captain to the slaves, not only his constant attendant and companion, but in all things his confidant. After this nothing more could be said, though indeed Captain Delano could hardly avoid some little tinge of irritation upon being left ungratified in so inconsiderable a wish by one too, for whom he intended such solid services. But it is only his querulousness, thought he, and so filling his glass he proceeded to do business. The price of the sails and other matters was fixed upon. While this was being done, the American observed that, though the original offer of assistance had been hailed with hectic animation, yet now, when it were reduced to a business transaction, indifference and apathy were betrayed. Don Benito, in fact, appeared to submit to hearing the details more out of regard to common propriety than from any impression that weighty benefit to himself and his voyage were involved. Gonna pause in and take a quick drink. Soon his manner became still more reserved. The effort were vain to seek to draw him into social talk. Gnawed by his splenetic mood, he sat twitching his beard, while the little purpose, the hand of his servant, nearest out of the wall, slowly pushed over the canary. Lunch being over, they sat down on the cushioned transom of the servant placing a pillow behind his master. The long continuance of the cabin had now affected the atmosphere. Don Benito sighed heavily, as if for breath. "Why not adjourn to the cuddy?" said Captain Delano. "There's more air there." But the host sat silent and motionless. Meantime, his servant knelt before him with a large fan of feathers, and Francesco, coming in on tiptoes, handed the negro a little cup of aromatic waters, with which at intervals he chafed his master's brow, smoothing the air along the temples as a nurse does a child's. He spoke no words. He only rested his eyes on his master's, as if, amid all Don Benito's distress, a little to refresh his spirit by the silent sight of fidelity. Presently the ship's bell sounded 2 o'clock, and, through the cabin windows, a slight rippling of the sea was discerned from the desired direction. "There," exclaimed Captain Delano, "I told you so, Don Benito, look." He had risen to his feet, speaking in a very animated tone, with a view the more to rouse his companion. Though the crimson curtain of the stern window near him at that moment fluttered against his pale cheek, Don Benito seemed to have even less welcome for the breeze than the calm. Poor fellow, thought Captain Delano. Bitter experience has taught him one ripple does not make a wind, any more than one swallow a summer. But he is mistaken for once. I will get his ship in for him and prove it. Briefly alluding to his weak condition, he urged the host to remain quietly where he were, since he, Captain Delano, would with pleasure take upon himself the responsibility of making best use of the wind. Upon gaining the deck, Captain Delano started at the unexpected figure of Atufo, momentarily fixed at the threshold, like one of those sculptured porters of black marble guarding the porches of Egyptian tombs. This time the start were, perhaps, purely physical. Atufo's presence, singularly attesting docility even in sullenness, were contrasted with that of the hatchet polishers, who impatience evinced their industry. While both spectacles showed that lax as Don Benito's general authority might be, still, whenever he chose to exert it, no man so savage or colossal but must more or less bow. Snatching a trumpet which hung from the bulwarks, the free step, Captain Delano advanced to the forward edge of the poop, issuing his orders in his best Spanish. A few sailors and many negroes, all equally pleased, obediently set about heading the ship towards the harbour. Whilst given some directions about setting the lower stern sail, suddenly Captain Delano heard a voice faithfully repeating his orders. Turning, he saw Baba, now for the time acting under the pilot, his original part captain of the slaves. This assistance proved valuable. Tad sails and warp yards were soon brought into some trim, and no brace or halyard were pulled with the blast song of the inspirited negroes. Good fellows, thought Captain Delano. A little training would make fine sailors of them. Why, see, the very women pull and sing too. These must be some of those Ashanti negresses that make such capital soldiers, I've heard. But who's at the helm? I must have a good hand there. He went to sea. The San Dominick steered with a cumbrous tiller with large horizontal pulleys attached. At each pulley end stood a subordinate black, and between them, at the tiller head, the responsible post, a Spanish seaman whose countenance evinced his due share in general hopefulness and confidence at the coming of the breeze. He proved the same man who had behaved with so shamefaced an air on the windlass. "Ah, it's you, my man," exclaimed Captain Delano. Well, no more sheep's eyes now. Look straight forward and keep the ship on. So, good hands, I trust. You want to get into the harbour, don't you? The man assented with an inward chuckle, grasping the tiller head firmly. Upon this, unperceived by the American, the two blacks eyed the sailor intently. Finding all right at the helm, the pilot went forward to the forecastle to see how matters stood there. The ship now had way enough to breast the current. With the approach of evening, the breeze would be sure to freshen. Having done all that were needed for the present, Captain Delano, giving his last orders to the sailors, turned aft to report affairs to Don Benito in the cabin. Perhaps additionally inside to rejoin him by the open snatching a moment's private chat while the servant were engaged upon deck. From opposite sides there were, beneath the poop, two approaches to the cabin, one further forward than the other, consequently communicating with a longer passage. Marking the servant still above, Captain Delano, taking the nighest entrance, the one last named, and at whose porch a Toothful still stood, hurried on his way till arrived at the cabin threshold. He paused an instant, a little recovered from his eagerness. Then, with the words of his intended business upon his lips, he entered. As he advanced towards the seated Spaniard, he heard another footstep, keeping time with his. From the opposite door, a salver in hand, the servant will likewise advance him. Found the faithful fellow, thought Captain Delano. What a vexatious coincidence. Possibly the vexation might have been something different, were it not for the brisk confidence inspired by the breeze. But even as it were, he felt a slight twinge from a sudden indefinite association in his mind of Baba with our Toothful. Don Benito, said he, I give you joy. The breeze will hold and will increase. By the way, your tall man and time police, our Toothful, stands without. By your order, of course. Don Benito recoiled, as if some bland, satirical touch delivered by such adroit garnish of apparent good breeding as to present no handle for retort. He's like one flayed alive, thought Captain Delano. Where may one touch him without causing shrink? The servant moved before his master, adjusting a cushion. Recalled the civility, the Spaniard stiffly replied, You are right. The slave appears when you saw him, according to my command, which is that if at the given hour I am below, he must take his stand and abide my coming. And now pardon me, for that is treating the poor fellow like an ex-key indeed. Don Benito, smiling, for all the license you permit in some things, I fear lest, at bottom, you are a bitter hard master. Again Don Benito shrank, and this time, as the good sailor thought, from a genuine twinge of his conscience. Again conversation became constrained. In vain Captain Delano called attention with an imperceptible motion to the keel, gently cleaving the sea. With a lacklustre eye, Don Benito returned words, few and reserved. By and by, the wind, having steadily risen and still blowing right into the harbour, bore the San Dominick swiftly on. Rounding upon a land, the sealer at a distance come into open view. Meantime, Captain Delano had again repaired to the deck, remaining there some time. Having at last altered the ship's course so as to give the reef a wide berth, to return for a few moments below. I'll cheer up my poor friend this time, he thought. Better and better, Don Benito, he cried as he blithely re-entered. There will soon be an end to your cares, at least for a while. But when after a long sad voyage, the anchor drops into the haven, all its vast weight seems lifted from the captain's arm. We're getting on famously, Don Benito. Our ship is in sight. Look through this side light here. There she is, all a taut. A bachelor's delight, my good friend. This wind braces one up. Come, you must take a cup of coffee with me this evening. My old steward will give you as fine a cup as ever a sultan tasted. What say you, Don Benito, will you? At first the Spaniard glanced feverishly up, casting a longing look towards the sealer, while with a mute concern his servant gazed into his face. Suddenly the old orb of coldness returned, and dropping back into his cushions he was silent. You do not answer. Come all day you have been my host. Would you have hospitality all on one side? I cannot go, was the response. What? It will not fatigue you. The ships will lie together as near as they can without swinging foul. It will be little more than stepping from deck to deck, which is but as from room to room. Come, you must not refuse me. I cannot go, decisively and repulsively repeated Don Benito. Renouncing all but the last appearance of courtesy with a sort of cadaverous sullenness, biting his thin smile at the quick, he glanced, almost glared at his guest, as if impatient that a stranger's presence should interfere with the full indulgence of his morbid hour. Meantime, the sound of the party waters come more and more great, gurglingly and merrily in at the windows, as reproaching him for his dark spleen, as telling him that, sulk as he might and go mad with it, nature cared not a jot, since whose fault were it, pray? The foul mood were now at its depth, as the fair wind at its height. There was something in the man, so far beyond any mere unsociality or sourness previously evinced, even forbearing good nature of his guest could no longer endure it. Wholly at a loss to account for such demeanour, and deeming sickness with eccentricity, over extreme, no adequate excuse, well satisfied, too, that nothing in his own conduct could justify it, Captain Delano's pride began to be roused. Himself become reserved. All seemed wanting the Spaniard. Quitting him, therefore, Captain Delano once more went to the deck. The ship were now within less than 2 miles of the sealer. The whaleboat was seen darting over the interval. To be brief, the two vessels, thanks to the pilot's skill, ere long in neighbourly style, lay anchored together. Before returning to his own vessel, Captain Delano had intended communicating to Don Benito the small detail of the proposed service to be rendered, but as it were, unwilling now anew to subject himself to rebuffs, resolved now that he had seen the San Dominick safely moored, immediately to quit her, without further allusion to hospitality or business. Indefinitely postponing his ulterior plan, he would regulate his future actions according to future circumstances. His boat were ready to receive him, but his host still tarried below. Well, thought Captain Delano, if he has little breeding, then the more need to show mine. He descended to the cabin to bid ceremonious, and, it may be, tactfully rebukeful adieus. But his great satisfaction, Don Benito, as if he began to feel the weight of the retreatment with which his slighted guests had, not indecorously retaliated upon him, now supported by his servant, rose to his feet, and grasping Captain Delano's hand, stood tremulously, too much agitated to speak. The good augury he hence drawn was suddenly dashed by his resuming all his previous reserve with augmented gloom, as with half-averted eyes he silently reseated himself on his cushions. With a corresponding return of his own chilled feelings, Captain Delano bowed and withdrew. He were hardly midway in the narrow corridor, dim as a tunnel leading from the cabin to the stairs, when a sound, as of the tolling for execution in some jail yard, fell on his ears. It was the echo of the ship's floor bell, striking the hour, drearily reverberated in the subterranean vault. Instantly, by a fatality not to be withstood, his mind, responsive to the portent, swarmed with superstition, or superstitious suspicion. He paused. An image is far swifter than these sentences, the minutest details of all his former distrust swept through it. Hitherto, credulous good nature had been too ready to furnish excuses for reasonable fears. Why were the Spaniards, so superfluously punctilious at times, now heedless of common propriety in not accompanying to the side his departing guest? Did indisposition forbid? Indisposition had not forbidden more irksome exertion that day. His last equivocal demeanour occurred. He had risen to his feet, grasped his guest's hand, motioned towards his hand. Then, in an instant, all were eclipsed in sinister muteness and gloom. Did this imply one brief, repentant relenting at the final moment, or some inquietus plot, followed by remorseless return to it? His last glance seemed to express a calamitous yet acquiescent farewell to Captain Delano forever. Why decline the invitation to visit the sealer that evening? Were the Spaniards less ardent than their due, who refrained not from supping at the board of him who the same night he meant to betray? Love the anti-Semitism, that Lord. Everything in this book. What imported all those day-long enigmas and contradictions, except they were intended to mystify, preliminary to some stealthy blow? And twofold, the pretended rebel but punctual shadow that moment lurked by the threshold without. He seemed a sentry and more, who, by his own confession, had stationed him there, with the negro now lying in wait. The Spaniard beyond, as creature before, rushed from darkness to light with the involuntary choice. The next moment, with clenched jaw in hand, he passed the twofold and stood unarmed in the light. As he saw his trim ship lying peacefully at anchor and almost within ordinary call, as he saw his household boat with familiar faces in it, patiently rising and falling on the short waves by the San Dominick's side, and then, glancing about the deck where he stood, saw the oakum pickers still gravely playing their fingers, and heard the low buzz and whistle and industrious hum of the hatchet polishers still bestirring themselves over their endless occupation. A and more than all, as he saw the benign aspect of nature taking her innocent repose in the evening, the screen sun in the quiet camp of the west shining out like the mild light from Abraham's tent. His charmed eye and ear took in all these, with the chained figure of the black, clenched jaw and hand relaxed. Once again he smiled at the phantoms which had mocked him, and felt something like a tinge of remorse that, by harbouring them even for a moment, he should by implication have betrayed an atheist doubt of the ever-watchful providence above. There were a few minutes' delay while, in obedience to his orders, the boat were being hooked along the gangway. During this interval, a sort of saddened satisfaction stole over Captain Delano, and thinking of the kindly officers he had that day discharged for a stranger. Ah, thought he, after good action one's conscience is never ungrateful, however much so the benefit feared party may be. Presently his foot, in the first act of descending the boat, pressed the first round of the side ladder, his face presented inward upon the deck. At the same moment he heard his name courteously sounded, and, to his pleased surprise, saw Don Benito advancing, an unwonted energy in his air, as if at the last moment intent upon making amends for his recent discourtesy. With instinctive good feeling, Captain Delano, withdrawing his foot, turned and reciprocally advanced. As he did so, the Spaniard's nervous eagerness increased, but his vital energy failed, so that the better to support him, the servant, placing his master's hand on his naked shoulder and gently holding it there, formed himself into a sort of crutch. When the two captains met, the Spaniard again feverishly took the hand of the American, at the same time casting an earnest glance into his eyes. As before, too much overcome to speak. "I've done him wrong," self-reproachfully thought Captain Delano. "His apparent coldness has deceived me. In no instance he meant to offend." Meantime, as if fearful that the continuance of the scene might too much unstring his master, the servant seemed anxious to terminate it. And so, still presenting himself as a crutch, and walking between the two captains, he advanced with them towards the gangway, while, still as if full of kind of contrition, Don Benito would not let go the hand of Captain Delano, retained it in his across the black's body. Soon they were standing by the side, looking over into the boat, whose crew turned up their curious eyes. Waiting a moment for the Spaniard to relinquish his hold, the now embarrassed Captain Delano lifted his foot to overstep the threshold of the open gangway, and still Don Benito would not let go his hand. And yet, with an agitated tone, he said, "I can go no further. Here I must bid you adieu. Adieu, my dear Don Amasa. Go, go," suddenly tearing his hand loose. "Go, and God guard you better than me and my best friend." Not unaffected, Captain Delano would now have lingered, but catching the meekly admonitory eye of the servant, with hasty farewell he descended into his boat, followed by the continued adieus of Don Benito, standing rooted in the gangway. Go have a quick swallow of water here. Seating himself in the stern, Captain Delano, making a last salute, ordered the boat shoved off. The crew had their oars on end. The bowsman pushed the boat a sufficient distance for the oars to be lengthwise dropped. The instant that were done, Don Benito sprang over the bulwarks, falling at the feet of Captain Delano, at the same time calling towards his ship, but in tones so frenzied that none on the boat could understand him. But, as if not equally obtuse, 3 sailors from 3 different and distant parts of the ship splashed into the sea, swimming after their captain, as if intent upon his rescue. The dismayed officer of the boat eagerly asked what this meant, to which Captain Delano, turning a disdainful smile upon the unaccountable Spaniard, answered that for his part he neither knew nor cared, but it seemed as if Don Benito had taken it into his head to reduce the impression among his people that the boat wanted to kidnap him. "Or else give way for your lives," he wildly added, starting at a clattering hubbub in the ship, above which rang the tosses of the hatchet polishers, and seizing Don Benito by his throat, he added, "This plotting pirate means murder." Here, in apparent verification of the words, the servant, a dagger in his hand, was seen on the rail overhead, poised in the act to leap him, as if with desperate fidelity, to befriend his master to the last, while seemingly to aid the black, the 3 white sailors were trying to clamber into the hampered bow. Meantime, the whole host of negroes, as if inflamed at the sight of their jeopardized captain, impended in one sooty avalanche over the bulwarks. All this, with what preceded and what followed, occurred with such involutions of rapidity that past, present, and future seemed one. Seeing the negro coming, Captain Delano had flung the Spaniard aside, almost in the very act of clutching him, and by that unconscious recoil, shifting his place, with his arms thrown up, so promptly grappling the servant in his descent that, with the dagger presented at Captain Delano's arm, the black seemed to purpose to have leaped there as to his mark. But the weapon were wrenched away, and the assailant dashed down at the bottom of the boat, which now, with disentangled oars, began to speed through the sea. At this juncture, the left hand of Captain Delano on one side again clutched the half-reclining Don Benito, heedlessly in a speechless faint, while his right foot on the other side ground the prostrate negro, his right arm pressed for additional speed on the after oar. His eyes bent forward, encouraging his men in their utmost. But here the officer of the boat, who had at last succeeded in beating off the towing sailors, and were now, with face turned aft, assisting the bowsman at his oar, suddenly called to Captain Delano to see what the black were about, while a Portuguese oarsman shouted to him to give heed to what the Spaniard was saying. Glancing down at his feet, Captain Delano saw the freed hand of the servant aiming with a second dagger, a small one, before concealed in his wool. With this he was snakishly writhing up from the boat's bottom at the art of his master, his countenance lividly vindictive, expressing the centred purpose of his soul, while the Spaniard half-choked, vainly shrinking away with husky words incoherent to all but the Portuguese. At that moment, across the long-benighted mind of Captain Delano, a flash of revelation swept, illuminating in unanticipated clearness his own mysterious demeanour, with every animatic event of the day, as well as the entire past voyage of the San Dominique. He smote Babo's hand down, but his own heart smote him harder. With infinite pity he withdrew his hold from Don Benito. Not Captain Delano, but Don Benito, the black, in leaping in the boat, had intended to stab. Both the black's hands were held as, glancing up towards San Dominique, Captain Delano, now with scales dropped from his eyes, saw the negroes not in misrule, but not in tumult, not as if frantically concerned for Don Benito, with masks torn away, flourishing hatchets and knives, in ferocious piratical revolt. Like delirious black dervishes, the six Ashantis danced on the poop. Prevented by their foes from springing into the water, the Spanish boys were hurrying up to the topmost spars, while such of the few Spanish sailors not already in the sea, less alert, were descried helplessly mixed in on deck with the blacks. Got to pause here for a time because, of course, we're about to hit another ad break, and I'll let that run before we carry on. Right, oh. Let's have a quick drink of water while that plays. And that there the end is the end of my water, so I'm going to go fetch another drink of it. But while I do, let's do some thoughts, shall we? So, what is there to say about this then? So, it seems pretty clear from what's just happened and what is about to happen that this Don Benito was some sort of prisoner of his other seemingly faithful servant. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, clearly he was a prisoner of some sort of the of Babu, who was pretending to be a servant, and he's now making his attempt to escape onto the ship at the behest of the hope of making away free and clear from captivity hold on him. And it turns out that actually the black crewmen who were being given such pleasant, docile treatment were actually all nefarious villains who have turned pirate and rebelled against their masters, you know? Which, I mean, good for them, honestly. Like, if you're transporting a ship full of slaves, you deserve to be overthrown. I've got no real sympathy for Benito, nor especially for this captain, you know? He spent enough time talking about the docile qualities of the Negroes that you know, I mean, like, again, it's one of those things where probably for the time he's meant to be forward-thinking and righteous, but honestly, fuck this guy, genuinely. I hope the crew of pirates gets them. I hope the escaped slaves take the whaling ship and you know, sail on the Nassau or wherever. Still, probably that's not what's going to happen. I'm sure there'll be something. But we got 22 pages left, I think, from where we are, which should be about an hour's more reading. So, still going to, like I say, going to finish this story tonight. I said I'd do it, and I'm going to do it. And again, I'm still not especially enjoying it. Like, this is exciting. Like, at least something's happening now, which is good. But it's taken 3/4 of the story to get us there, and the build-up feels like it's been very agonising for a payoff that is not especially like grand. And it doesn't help that I felt very dry that night, which is have another drink while I say that. But yeah. Oh. Right, that's the outbreak over. So let's push on and we'll try and get this all finished, shall we? Meantime, Captain Delano hailed his own vessel, ordering the ports up and the guns run out. By this time, the cable of the San Dominique had been cut, and the flag end, in lashing out, whipped away the canvas shroud about the beak suddenly revealing, as the bleached hull swung around towards the open ocean, death for the figurehead and human skeleton. Chalky comment on the chalked words, below, follow your leader. At the start, Don Benito, covering his face, wailed out, "'Tis he, Aranda, my murdered unburied friend." Upon reaching the sealer, calling for ropes, Captain Delano bound the Negro, who made no resistance, and had him hoisted to the deck. He would then have assisted the now almost helpless Don Benito up the side, but Don Benito wan as he were, refused to move or be moved until the Negro should have been first put below out of view. When presently assured it were done, he no more shrank from the ascent. The boat were immediately dispatched back to pick up the 3 swimming sailors. Meantime, the guns was in readiness. The owner of the San Dominique having glided somewhere astern of the sealer, only the aftmost could be brought to bear. With this they fired 6 times, thinking to cripple the fugitive ship by bringing down her spars. Only a few inconsiderable ropes were shot away. Soon the ship were beyond the gun's range, steering broad out of the bay. The blacks thickly clustered round the bowsprit, one moment with the taunting cries towards the whites, the next with upthrown gestures hailing the new dusky moors of ocean. Corn crows escaped from the hand of the fowler. The first impulse was to slip the cables and give the chase, but, upon second thoughts, to pursue with the whaleboat and yawl seemed more promising. Upon inquiring of Don Benito what firearms they had on board the San Dominique, Captain Delano were answered that they had none that could be used, because in the earlier stages of the mutiny, a cabin passenger, since dead, had secretly put out of order the locks of what few muskets there was. With all his remaining strength, Don Benito entreated the American not to give chase, either with ship or boat, for the Negroes had already proved themselves such desperadoes that, in case of a present assault, nothing but a total massacre of the whites could be looked for. But regarding this warning as coming from one whose spirit had been crushed by misery, the American did not give up his design. The boats was got ready and armed. Captain Delano ordered his men into them. He was going himself when Don Benito grasped his arm. "What have you said to my life, senor, and are you now going to throw away your own?" The officers also, for reasons connected with the interests and those of the voyage, and a duty owing to the owners, strongly objected against their commander's going. Weighing their remonstrances a moment, Captain Delano felt bound to remain, and appointed his chief mate, an athletic and resolute man, who had been a privateer's man, to head the party. The more to encourage the sailors, they was told that the Spanish captain considered his ship good as lost, and that she and her cargo, including some gold and silver, was worth more than 1,000 doubloons. Take her, and no small part should be theirs. The sailors replied with a shout. The fugitives are now almost gained an offing. It were nearly night, but the moon were rising. After hard, prolonged pulling, the boats come up on the ship's quarters, a suitable distance, laying upon their oars to discharge their muskets. Having no bullet to return, the negroes sent their yells, but, upon the second volley, Injun-like, they held their hatchets. One took off a sailor's fingers, another struck the whaleboat's bow, cutting off the rope. There, and remaining stuck in the gunwale like a woodsman's axe. Snatching it, quivering from its lodgment, the mate held it back. The return gauntlet now struck in the ship's broken quarter gallery, and so remained. And the negroes given too hot a reception, the whites kept a more respectful distance. Whether now just out of reach of the Earl and hatchets, they, with a view to close encounter what must soon come, sought to decoy the blacks into entirely disarming themselves of their most murderous weapons, and hand-to-hand fire, by foolishly flinging them as missiles short of the mark into the sea. But ere long, perceiving the stratagem, the negroes desisted, though not before many of them had to replace their lost hatchets with handspikes, an exchange which, as counted upon, proved in the end favourable to the assailants. Meantime, with a strong wind, the ship still clove the water, the boats alternatively falling behind and pulling up, discharged fresh volleys. The fire were mostly directed towards the stern, since there chiefly the negroes' presence was clustered. But to kill or maim the negroes were not the object. To take them with the ship were the object. To do it, the ship must be boarded, which could not be done by boats while she was sailing so fast. A thought now struck the mate. Observing the Spanish boys still aloft, high as they could get, he called to them to descend to the yards and cut adrift the sails. It were done. About this time, owing to causes hereafter to be shown, 2 Spaniards in the dress of sailors, and conspicuously showing themselves, were killed, not by volleys but by deliberate marksman's shots, while, as it afterwards appeared, by one of the general discharges, our Teufel, the black and the Spaniard at the helm, likewise was killed. What now, with the loss of the sails and the loss of leaders, the ship become unmanageable to the negroes. With creak and mast, she come heavily round the wind. The prow, slowly swinging into view of the boats, its skeleton gleaming in the horizontal moonlight, and casting a gigantic ribbed shadow upon the water. One extended arm of the ghost seemed beckoning the whites to avenge it. "Follow your leader," cried the mate, and one on each bow, the boats boarded. Sealing spears and cutlasses, crossed hatchets and handspikes. Huddled upon the longboat amidship, the negresses raised a wailing chant, whose chorus was the clash of the steel. For a time the attack wavered, the negroes wedging themselves to beat it back, the half-repelled sailors, as yet unable to gain a footing, fighting as troopers in the saddle, one leg sideways flung over the bulwarks, and one without, plying their cutlasses like carters' whips. But in vain. It was almost overborne when, rallying themselves into the squad as one man within his heart, they sprang inboard where, entangled, they involuntarily separated again. For a few breaths' space there were a vague muffled inner sound, as of a submerged swordfish rushing hither and thither, through the shoals of blackfish. Soon, in a reunited band, and joined by the Spanish seamen, the whites come to the surface, irresistibly driving the negroes towards the stern. A barricade of casks and sacks from side to side had been thrown up by the mainmast. Here the negroes faced about, and no scoring peace or truce, yet fain would have had respite. But without pause, overleaping the barrier, the unflagging sailors again closed. Exhausted, the blacks now fought in despair. The red tongues lolled wolf-like from their black mouths. But the pale sailors' teeth were set, not a word was spoken, and in 5 minutes more the ship were won. Nearly a score of the negroes were killed. Exclusive of those by the balls, many were mangled, their wounds mostly inflicted by the long-edged sealant spears, resembling those shaven ones of the English at Preston Pans, made by the poled sires of the Islanders. On the other side, none was killed, as several was wounded, some severely, including the mate. The surviving negroes were temporarily secured, and the ship, towed back into harbour at midnight, once more lay anchored. Amid the incidents and arrangements ensuing, suffice it that after 2 days spent in refitting the ships, sailed in company for Concepcion in Chile, and thence for Lima in Peru, where before the viceregal courts the whole affair from beginning underwent investigation. Though midway on the passage the ill-fated Spaniard relaxed from constraint, showed some sign of regaining health, with free will, yet agreeably to his own foreboding, shortly before arriving at Lima, he relapsed, finally becoming so reduced as to be carried ashore in arms. Hearing of his story and plot, one of the many religious institutions of the City of Kings opened an hospitable refuge to him, where both physicians and priests were his nurses. A member of the order volunteered to be his one special guardian and consoler, night by day. The following extracts, translated from one of the official Spanish documents, will, it be hoped, shed light on the preceding narrative, as well, in the first place, revealing the true part of departure and true history of the San Dominic's voyage, down to the time of her touching at the island of Santa Maria. But ere the extracts come, it may be well to preface them with a remark. A document selected from among many others for partial translation contains the deposition of Benito Cereno, the first taken in the case. Some disclosures therein were at the time held dubious for both learned and natural reasons. The tribunal inclined to the opinion that the deponent, nor undisturbed in his mind by recent events, ray to some things which could never have happened. The subsequent dispositions of the surviving sailors, bearing out the revolutions of their captain and several of the stranger particulars, gave credence to the rest. So the tribunal, in its final decision, rested its capital sentences upon statements which, had they lacked confirmation, would have deemed it but duty to reject. Got to pause here to have a quick drink before we go on to this. I, Don Jose de Abos and Padilla, His Majesty's Notary for the Royal Revenue, Registrar of this province and Notary Public of the Holy Crusade of this bishopric, etc., to certify and declare as much as is requisite law that in the criminal cause commenced at the 24th of month of September in the year 1799 against the negroes of the ship St. Dominic, the following declaration before me was made. Declaration of the first witness, Don Benito Cereno. The same day in 40 streak. Wow, that's one hell of a streak. Genuinely appreciate you being here so often and so long. Congratulations. I cannot say how glad I am to have had you so long. Declaration of the witness, Don Benito Cereno. The same day and month and year it is honoured that the... What are you thanking me for? You're the one who's shown your dedication. Lord. You still have a longer streak of coming to these than I do, which is remarkable given that I'm the streamer. The same day and month and year it is honoured Dr. Juan Martinez de Rosa, Councillor of the Royal Audience of this kingdom and learned in the law of this intendancy, ordered the captain of the ship San Dominic, Don Benito Cereno, to appear, which he did in his litter, attended by the monk Infideles, of whom he received the oath, which he took by God our Lord, and a sign of the cross, under which he promised to tell the truth, whatever he should know and should be asked. And being interrogated agreeably to the tenor of the act, committing the process, he said that on the 20th of May last, he set sail with the ship from the port of Valparaiso, bound to that of Callao, loaded with the produce of the country, besides 30 pieces of hardware and 160 blacks, of both sexes, mostly belonging to Don Alexandro Andrea, gentleman of the city of Mendoza. And the crew of the ship consisted of 36 men, beside the boatswain who went as passengers. The negroes were embarked as follows. Here in the original follows a list of some 50 names, descriptions and ages, compiled from certain recovered documents and Mirandas, and also from recollections of the deponent, from which portions are only extracted. One from about 18 to 19 years named Jose, and this was the man that waited upon his master, Don Alexandro, who speaks well the Spanish, having served him 4 or 5 years. A mulatto named Francisco, the cabin steward of a good person and voice, having son in the Valparaiso churches, native of the province of Buenos Aires, aged about 35 years. A smart negro named Dago, who had been for many years a great digger among the Spaniards, aged 46 years. 4 old negroes born in Africa from 60 to 70, but sound caucus by trade, whose names are as follows. The first was named Muir, and he was killed, as was also his son named Dimalo. The second Nectar, the third Yola, was killed, the fourth Gofan, and 6 full-grown negroes aged from 30 to 45, all Rohan born among the Ashantis. Matinqui, Yao, Lekpe, Mapenda, Yambao, Hakim, 4 of whom were killed. A powerful negro named Antufal, who being supposed to have been a chief in Africa, his owner set great store by him. And a small negro of Senegal, but some years among the Spaniards, aged about 30, whose negro's name was Babo. That he does not remember the names of the others, but that still expecting the residue of Don Alexandro's papers would be found, will then take due account of them and remit to the court, and 39 women and children of all ages. The catalogue over, the deposition goes on. The other Negro stepped upon the deck as is customary in this kind of navigation, and none were fetters because the owner, his friend Aranda, told them they were untractable. And on the 7th day after leaving port at 3 o'clock in the morning, all the Spaniards being asleep, except 2 officers of the watch, were the boatswain Juan Robles and the carpenter Juan Bautista Gaete, and the helmsman and his boy. The Negroes revolted suddenly, wounded dangerously the boatswain and carpenter, and successfully killed 18 men of those who were sleeping upon deck, some with handspikes and hatchets, and others by throwing them alive overboard after tying them. That of the Spaniards upon deck they left about 7 as he thanks alive, and tied to maneuver the ship, and 3 or 4 more who hid themselves remained also alive. Though in the act of revolt the Negroes made themselves master of the hatchway, 6 or 7 wounded went through it to the cockpit without any hindrance on their part. And during the act of revolt the mate and another person, whose name he does not recollect, attempted to come up through the hatchway, but being quickly wounded were obliged to return to the cabin, and the deponent resolved at break of day to come up to the companionway where the Negro Babel was, being the ringleader, and the Tufel who assisted him, and having spoken to them, he exhorted them to cease committing such atrocities, asking them at the same time what they wanted and intended to do, offering himself to obey their commands. That notwithstanding this, they threw in his presence 3 men alive and tied overboard. They told the deponent to come up and that they would not kill him, which having done, the Negro Babo asked him whether there were in those seas any Negro countries where they might be carried, and he answered them no, that the Negro Babo afterwards told him to carry them to Senegal, or to the neighbouring land of St. Nicholas, and the answer to this was impossible on account of the great distance and the necessity involved of holding Cape Horn, the bad condition of the vessel, the want of provisions, sails, and water. But that the Negro Babo replied to him that he must carry them anyway, that they would do and conform themselves to anything that the opponent should not require as to eating and drinking. After a long conference, being absolutely compelled to please them, for they threatened to kill all the whites if they were not at all events carried to Senegal, he told them that what was most wanting for the voyage was water. They would go near the coast to take it, and thence they would proceed on their course to the Negro Babo agreed to it, and the opponents steered towards the intermediate ports, hoping to meet some Spanish or foreign vessel that would save them. Within 10 or 11 days they saw the land and continued their course by in the vicinity of Nasca. The deponent observed that the Negroes were now restless and mutinous because he did not effect the taking in of water. The Negro Babo, having required with threats that it should be done without fail, the following day he told them he saw plainly that the coast was steep and the rivers designated in the maps were not to be found, with other reasons suitable to the circumstances. That the best way would be to go to the island of Santa Maria, where they might water easily, it being a solitary island as the foreigners did, and the opponent did not go to Pisco, that was near, nor make any other part of the coast, because the Negro Babo had intimated to him several times that he would kill all the whites the very moment he should perceive any city, town, or settlement of any kind on the shores to which they should be carried. And having determined to go on to the island of Santa Maria, as the opponent had planned, for the purpose of trying whether on the passage or near the island itself they could find any vessel that should favour them, whether he could escape from it in a boat to the neighbouring coast of Aracor, to adopt the necessary means, he immediately changed his course, steering for the island. The Negroes Babo and the Tufel had daily conferences in which they discussed what was necessary for the design of returning to Senegal, whether they were to kill all the Spaniards, and particularly the deponent. 8 days after parting from the coast of Nasca, the opponent being on the watch a little after daybreak, and soon after the Negroes had their meeting, the Negro Babo came to the place where the deponent was and told him that he had determined to kill his master, Don Alexandro Aranda, both because he and his companions could not otherwise be sure of their liberty, and because to keep the seamen in subjection he wanted to prepare a warning of what road they should be made to take, did they or any of them oppose him, and that by means of death of Don Alexandro, that warning would be best given. But that what this meant, the deponent did not at the time comprehend, nor could not further, that the death of Don Alexandro was intended, and moreover the Negro Babo proposed to the deponent to call the mate Ranitz, who was sleeping in the cabin, before the thing was done, for fear as the deponent understood it that the mate, who was a good navigator, should not be killed with Don Alexandro and the rest, and the deponent, who was the friend from youth of Don Alexandro, prayed in conscience but all was useless, for the Negro Babo answered him the thing could not be prevented, that all Spaniards risked death if they should attempt to frustrate his will in this matter, or any other. I'm just going to take a pause here. There is very little punctuation to this, and what there is all semicolons, and it's just an unbroken line. I cannot say I rate this story at all. I have a quick swallow of water here. There's still like 15 pages to go. That in this conflict, the opponent called the Mediterraneans was forced to go apart, and immediately the Negro Babo commanded the Ashanti Matiniqui and the Ashanti Lekbe to go and commit the murder. Those two went down with hatchets to the berth of Don Alexandro. That, yet half alive and mangled, they dragged him on the deck. They were going to throw him overboard in that state, but the Negro Bago stopped them, bidding the murder be completed on the deck before him, which was done. When, by his orders, the body was carried below, forwards, and nothing more was seen of it by the deponent for 3 days. Don Alonso Sidona, an old man, long resident in Valparaiso and lately appointed to a civil office in Peru, whither he had taken a passage, was at the time sleeping in the berth opposite Don Alexandro's. That awaiting it, his cries surprised them. At the sight of the Negroes with the bloody hatchets in their hands, he threw himself into the sea, through a window which was near him, and was drowned without it being in the power of the opponent to assist or take him up. They shot them after killing Aranda. They brought up on deck his cousin German, of middle age, Don Francisco Massa of Mendoza, and the young Don Joaquin Marquez de Aramboalaza, then lately from Spain, with his Spanish servant Ponce, and the 3 young clerks of Aranda, Jose Moreri, Lorenzo Balgas, and Hermenegildo Gandix, all of Cadiz. Don Joaquim and Hermenegildo Gandix, the Negro Babo, for purposes hereafter to appear, preserved alive. But Don Francisco Massa, Jose Morani, and Lorenzo Vargas, with Ponce the servant, beside the boatswain Juan Robles, the boatswain's mate Manuel Villascara, and Rodrigo Helta, and 4 of the sailors, the Negro Babo ordered to be thrown alive into the sea. All of them made no resistance, nor begged for anything else but mercy. But the boatswain Juan Robles, who knew how to swim, kept the longest above water, making acts of contrition, and, in the last words he uttered, charged the deponent to cause mass to be said for his soul to Our Lady of Succor. And during the 3 days which followed, the deponent, uncertain what fate had befallen the remains of Don Alexandro, frequently asked the Negro Babo what they were, and if still on board, whether they were to be preserved to the gentleman ashore, entreating him so to order it. But the Negro Babo answered nothing till the 4th day, when at sunrise the deponent, coming on deck, the Negro Babo showed him a skeleton which had been substituted for the ship's proper figurehead, the image of Cristobal Colon, the discoverer of the New World. The Negro Babo asked him whose skeleton that was, whether from its whiteness he should not think it a white's. And upon discovering his face, the Negro Babo, coming close, said words to this effect: "Keep faith with the blacks from here to Senegal, or you shall in spirit as now in body follow your leader," pointing to the prow. The same morning the Negro Babo took by succession each Spaniard forward and asked him whose skeleton that was, and whether from its whiteness he should not think it a white's. That each Spaniard covered his face, that to each Negro Babo repeated the words in the first place said to the opponent. That day, the Spaniards being then assembled aft, the Negro Babo harangued them, saying that he had now done all the opponent, as navigator for the Negros might pursue his course, warning him all of them that they should soul and body go the way of Don Alexandro if he saw them, the Spaniards, speak or plot anything against them, the Negros. A threat which was repeated every day before events last mentioned. They had tied the cook to throw him overboard, for it is not known what thing they heard him speak. Finally, the Negro Babo spent his life at the request of the deponent, and a few days after, the deponent, endeavouring not to omit any means to preserve the lives of the remaining whites, spoke to the Negroes peace and tranquility, and agreed to draw up a paper signed by the deponent and the sailors who could write, and also by the Negro Babo for himself and all the blacks, in which the deponent obliged himself to carry them to Senegal, and that they not kill any more, and formally to make over to them the ship with cargo, with which they were for the time satisfied and quieted. The next day, more surely to guard against the sailors' escape, the Negro Babo commanded all the boats to be destroyed, but the longboat, which was unseaworthy, and another cutter in good condition, which, knowing it would yet be wanted for the towing and water casks, he had lowered down into the hold. Various particulars of the prolonged and perplexed navigation and Suriname follows, with incidents of the calamitous calm, from which portions of the passage extracted to wit. Lord oh bloody mighty. Right, okay. So most of the rest of this is just the deposition, which I'm really tempted just to skip and not do, but I said I'd finish this and I'm going to. Just blah. Fair warning to you, there's not a lot more to this, so if you wanted to dip now, it wouldn't necessarily be something I would hold against you. And the 5th day, the calm all on board, suffering much from the heat and want of water, and 5, having died in fits and mad, the negroes became irritable, and for a chance gesture which they deemed suspicious, orders harmless made by the raid, ran aids to the opponent in the act of handing out quadrant. They killed him, but therefore decided afterwards were sorry, and the mate being only remaining navigator on board accepted opponents. At a meeting on other events, which daily happened, and which can only be useless to recall past misfortunes and conflicts after 73 days navigating. Am I doing this? It's literally just... yeah, this is literally just recounting the events of the story. Oh, Lord. You know what? I'm going to make the call here. We're not finishing this. There's nothing to this. Like, the whole thing is just recounting the obvious things that have happened. Namely, it's basically the story that was told, only with the addition of the rebellion. It's I'm gonna call it here. I think I'm not going through the rest of the book. Like, I mean, looking through it, all that is left is basically Babu gets hanged for his crimes, and they inter the bones of the man who was used as a figurehead in a church, and that's it. The rest of it is just court documents recounting the events that happened. I'm making the call. This is not a good enough. This is not a good book. Like, maybe it's unfair of me to make this call, but there's just nothing to it. I'm going on and on and on. I'm just thinking, God, I'm banging my head against the wall there. But yeah, I think I'm going to call that there. Yeah. I think. I mean, I said I was going to finish it, but look, there's just nothing to that. And it's doing something difficult to a purpose, and it's just doing nothing for nothing. I've got a low opinion of Melville. I think he's got a terrible habit of just going on the side of that mean anything. I mean, I know he's known for Moby Dick, but I'm just not interested in this. I don't think I want to look at any more of this stuff. So I'm sorry if you were open to the end of that. It's just not. It's just pages and pages of nothing. So yeah, let's give it a little. Let's give it some going over though. To give it its fairest shot. See, obviously the story is basically a subversion of this idea of a mystery. Like, you have this piratical idea that's come up. And in fact, the man who is suspected of it is innocent and is himself being held hostage, which is a very mild twist. And then there's a bunch of... Actually, what does happen in this story? A stranded ship washes up. Turns out that the crew is in mutiny, and they have a spokesman, and they're compelling to do it, or to act as their, and they're compelled to act as if he was the captain, or who is the captain, I should say. They kill the man. The ship is retaken. They're taken to shore, and they're tried for their crimes. And that's about it, really. Like, that story is 80 pages. 80 pages of dense text. And yeah, there's nothing to it. You can tell the whole story in a breath. Like, I feel bad cutting this off early. I feel bad getting most of the way through a story and then making this call. But I was struggling with that story before we got to the point where it was just a transcription of court documents told in the driest and most boring tone possible, and just recounting the whole rest of the story. And at that point, you're just sort of pissing about, right? There's nothing to this. There's no real, like, the most interesting characters are the rebelling Negroes who take the ship, and they're not given any like time or character. They're just, I mean, they're basically treated as objects until it turns out that they're, in mutiny, at which point they're treated as villains with no depth of character. There's no time given to them. Their very understandable motive of escaping from slavery is treated as sneering villainy. And I don't know. I know from things that I've heard from broader context that Melville was considered to be an anti-racist author. My God, that text just reads unbearably. Anyhow, I should probably read out, but I think I'm done. Thank you everyone for coming by. I do genuinely appreciate it. I'm sorry that this was such a rough story, and I'm sorry for my own attitude. But again, I'm not in the best headspace right now. But it's a very bad book as well. I apologise for wasting your time with it, and tomorrow we'll come back with something a bit better. Probably some more ghost stories. You're very welcome, Abbe. Sorry it wasn't a better one, but I do genuinely appreciate you coming by. I'm very happy for you to have had this streak. Yeah. Thank you everyone for stopping by. I do genuinely appreciate it more than I can say. And I wish you all the very best. And as always, ta-ra.